And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the Ideas Room for this very, very special first episode of 2026. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, I'll tell you, I always feel like somebody's watching me.
Mm-hmm.
I get no privacy. Well, tonight is Rockwell in the Hot Zone. This is an episode I've been working on in some form or another since 2023. And it is the CRAZE in the Hot Zone, the secret Atlantis breakthrough. And there's some NASA in here, Rockwell Aerospace, North American Aviation, deep, deep, deep links to the Edgar Cayce organization and a very secret organization doing archaeological work in the Bahamas called Mars, very well funded by some interesting money, shall we say, by the huge magnate of the Colonel himself, Colonel Sanders, his daughter, and her great alliance with the White House on one hand and the Cayce Foundation, the ARE on the other. Tonight's special episode X series 211. And it's a full moon tonight, and so I expect some wild remarks out there. For 2026, also have some very interesting thoughts about the entire way that we're being kind of forced into these various points of view in the independent media and how real independent media basically has nothing to do with the paid podcast world. And I think that split is going to become more and more apparent as we get into the year. Before I go any further, we got a lot of stuff to go into tonight. But Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Copernicus 1 says, "Evening all, Happy New Year to DJ, Olivia, and the Ideas Room's peoples."
Hey, Ideas Room 2026. This is going to be something else because, we've been carrying a lot of the narratives and bringing them across the finish line. And I want to do some very, very special episodes. I've been lining them up already. And we have some very, very exciting things lined up for you for 2026. I hope you're going to enjoy it. Most importantly, we're not going to be going for the sensationalism that you see splayed across the corporate media and the independent media, formerly the independent media, which is now another kind of appendage of the corporate media. So you have two versions of paid media there. So I think that anything along the lines of independent media is going to have to recreate itself and reestablish itself. And I know just the people who would do it. And it's very important because I think the whole thing last year slipped away and we saw how all the money and all the fighting and all that stuff from the really large groups coming in from Fox News and all that stuff and pretending to be independent and all these major groups funding these podcasts and all the rest were really creating a situation that's untenable as far as getting at the truth of things and just becomes gigantic shouting matches and, pop click frisbee world. There's so many important, crucial things to be looked at this year. Of course, all the politics and all the elections. We're not going to be in the politics tonight because we're deep in the Atlantis hot zone. But I'll tell you, in an election year, you're not going to be able to avoid them. So there's going to be this huge wash. And what we can do, we can take advantage of this at the very beginning of this year, which is we can set the tone right from the show. And that's what we're going to do. I had a great opportunity to go on the Alex Jones show last week. And it was a great time. And basically, one of the things that I got across in there was all about the president's executive order, which slipped through the cracks right around Christmas. Nobody paid attention to it, but it was absolutely crucial. And I recommend watching that just to get that information on this very special executive order, which is basically a UFO executive order. But one of the things it commands in there is for us to withdraw our participation in the International Space Station, the ISS, by 2030. And this goes into some very, very unusual territory. I can actually track the story of this executive order back to the crash in 1986 of the Challenger and how that reset the entire aerospace deck, as it were, and set back all of the manned missions for things that were going on and planned to go on. They were going to restart that program publicly. They got rid of it, the vestiges of JFK's vision of humanity in space. They came back with this other thing now, the Artemis version. And the Artemis piece is also in Trump's executive order, talking a lot about Artemis going back and saying, we're going to be, we'll have a nuclear reactor base on the moon by 2030. So there's a lot of strange questions about what they're going to be doing out there. And of course, what happened the 55 some odd years in between the last time we went to the moon. So not very good answers as far as I can tell. So our original hypothesis of the secret space program and the architecture therein seems very well confirmed by all of the things that we've seen about, you just hang out and you don't do space missions for 55 years. Doesn't seem likely. Manned missions, that is. But so that's going to get deep tonight because there's a big aerospace piece tonight, even though we're deep in the hot zone of the Bahamas, that is between Bimini, Cuba, and the Yucatan Peninsula. This is very interesting. Now, it's the 40th episode out of 211 X series episodes of the hot zone. And in that, we have covered the experiences of Ernest Hemingway and his activities between Bimini and Cuba around Atlantean ruins. We've covered John Lennon buying lots in the Atlantic Ocean. We've covered Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and everything that was going on in relation to their scientific surveys deep in the hot zone as part of the Belial cult. And I want to say this, that we've been doing those episodes literally since 2017. I think the first parts of the hot zone I put out there in 2016. And there's a lot of weird imitation. We've pointed it out. We've even legally cautioned a writer about it. And they've been going on these podcasts and presenting my hot zone work as their own. I want to start the year off with a clean slate and say that I have legally cautioned the individuals involved with this. And, it's not just a passing thing. They're using every little detail from all of our X series episodes to try to, please the podcast engine. And they're getting it all mixed up. And, they're trying to spin Belial as a good guy and all this kind of stuff. So we've pointed this out before. And for me, when you look at this, we're not going to have it this year. That's all I'm going to tell you. So anybody who's pulling that trip, they're going to hear from us loudly, and hopefully they just incorporate their own work and move forward with that. And if they mention our work, they cite it appropriately. And, there's not going to be any of this kind of hanging out, as we've seen so much. Thou shalt not steal. Isn't that right, Miss Olivia?
Theft seems to be the theme nowadays.
There's AI theft. There's plagiarism. I've seen a lot of plagiarism of work of, Walter Bosley, Joseph Farrell, a lot of the guests on this show. And so in that sense, I think it's something that should be more established, so that when somebody comes out and they're basically doing our material and doing our research that we've studied for, it should be pointed out and loudly, in a gentlemanly fashion, but to the point. And so I've already cautioned the individuals involved, but this is very important because the hot zone work is not, just some kind of random subject to throw spaghetti against the wall for clicks. It's got a real lineage. It's got real research breakthroughs. And I'll tell you, you can't punch the kind of things that we're working on here tonight into Grok and get the really deep answers on it. They just have whatever Grok has access to, which is basically Wikipedia, Reddit, and some sources here and there. It's not going to be substantial in that sense. What happens when an individual, a good researcher, goes in for a particular topic, and I've been talking to them my whole life, so I have some semblance of what it's like, is doors open because of their interaction with the topic. And this is the crucial thing that needs to be understood. You're not going to be able to imitate it with a bad plagiarist. You're not going to be able to imitate it with AI. It comes from that individual fingerprint, as it were. And it's their connecting with the material and opening it up. And that's what we depend on so many different researchers to do around these things. And, that's why over the years I've studied the work of people like Robert Bivall and Graham Hancock and so many of them. And when we had Graham up here, one of the things we talked about was, he came out and he did all these books about Atlantis, and they really blew up really loudly. And then what did he do? He took a turn off, and he started writing fiction. The fiction didn't do anywhere near as well as the other books, but the point was that he always knew where he was coming from. And I think this is an important thing, because I resonate with that. The things that I do, I know when I present them that they have validity behind them. And I know how important it is to point out the sources. See, when you have the sources incorporated, you're building what you have. You're not a child in the back trying to pretend that somebody else's stuff is yours. It's sort of pathetic. So we have a kind of a pathetic,
you have a wafer thin understanding.
Yes.
And you're just parroting talking points, trying to sound smart.
Exactly. And we see it all the time. Now, and the people are certainly capable of doing deep research. I don't know why they put themselves out there in this fashion, but we're seeing a lot of it. And one of the things that I got tipped off by a friend of mine who works around, podcasts and the really big money that's going into podcasts, you wouldn't believe it. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars being positioned in there. And one of the things that's in there is called peak metric. And I just want to point this out, as I have since October, that peak metric is something where these producers come in and they have a show, and then they treat it like a TV program. So it has to end on a cliffhanger. They need to put out as many shows as possible. And it doesn't matter what you do as long as you're out there all the time, because they figured out with peak metric, hey, as long as you throw a bunch of stuff out there, you have a better chance of having the most advertising dollars. It's literally that simple. So, we don't do advertising on this show at all. And so this whole thing is completely foreign to good work. But it dominates the entire scene. And people write to me and say, like, such and such podcast, they were doing this whole podcast and it sounded like your show. Isn't that interesting? Your work must be, catching on or catching up after all this time. And literally, it's just, when you get that commercial thing putting their hands on just the sizzle and not the steak of the whole thing, you have to point it out, and you have to, in order to have a good independent media and independent research identity, as we've had now over the past decade, you really cannot imitate that with the superficial thing. It doesn't work. It literally becomes very obvious, but not to people who aren't familiar with the space, who are just moving in and trying to figure out what's going on with it. They'll see something like this and they won't realize the difference. So we've come up against that before. We've come up against it with Gaia TV and smaller scale stuff. But the Intel takeover of so many of the topics, like the UFO file and things of that nature, that's one big piece. There's also another big piece, which is the marketing spot. And I've looked into the marketing companies that are doing this. And, they took a guy, just an example, and this is out of Wall Street Journal, our friends at Wall Street Journal. And, they took Sean Ryan, and he was like, I want to interview veterans and get their life stories. And they said, good, but you have to talk about UFOs. And he wasn't even particularly interested, didn't know anything about it. But he had to roll in these guys. So they hook him up with these producers, and they just bang, 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 put that marketing grid of all this stuff that people will do. And then he just sits there talking to those people, but he doesn't know anything about the subject. So you don't get anything from that. I'm sure he's a very nice guy, and his own intentions about what he's doing, make his show. But what I'm saying is the pressure in the background needs to be something is seen in the foreground for the public to be like, oh, you mean that show has 14 producers? Okay. The managing the content. And, I pointed out that so much of the stuff that was going on in the space was being massaged by the same TV producers from Lost. And there's a huge Fortune magazine thing about these producers going in and, will so-and-so be prosecuted by the French government? Come check it out tomorrow and find out, So they're using reality TV tactics in a field that's supposed to give the public the truth, and the public's getting very confused, in my opinion. So this is going to be a crucial thing, which is real transparency across the board and getting to the real potent topics. 2026, you're looking at something where we're going to have to get to the core and the really potent information, as you know, is the mantra on this program.
Mhm.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We are going deep, deep tonight in X Series 211, Rockwell in the Hot Zone, the secret Atlantis breakthrough. The Hot Zone, the entire concept, I'm going to present it tonight so that we understand it very clearly. And so many of you in the Ideas Room know this is the 40th episode of the Hot Zone series
40th.
inside. Wow, 40.
Wow.
Isn't it crazy? It
That
is.
is crazy.
I had no idea. I went back and checked it, but
It's amazing how many angles there are in the Hot Zone.
oh
You
yeah,
would think that it would be
Yes.
after 20, 25, it'd be done. 40 and going.
it's a gigantic interface of like very little touched upon topics as well, because people will sometimes be like, oh yeah, I think there was an underwater pyramid story around Bermuda. Yeah, but it's like this strange thread of stuff hanging out there. But the core story about Cayce's predictions, the people involved with that, trying to tap into it, and the presence of aerospace and deep, deep geopolitical forces is not often talked about. I want to remind you that we're going to take your questions in the second half of tonight's program. And also, you can ask those anytime. Miss Olivia is going to be putting them together. Also, if you're new here, go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That is a free newsletter, but it keeps you in touch with us and gets past all of the censorship that we see in social media, which is over the top. Probably, it's going into another bad phase on that tip. I just heard this big government, crackdown on speech thing going across with Europe, Israel. They're trying to get that over here. They just cannot have that free flow of conversation, but you can get past all of it by going to darkjournalist.com. And that link to the newsletter is actually in the description of this video. You can become a member, stand up and be counted, and make sure that you hear about the exciting docuseries, Pyramid X, Craze in the Hot Zone, JFK and the UFO File. They're all in there, along with incredible, and I mean incredible, interviews coming up for you in 2026. We've lined up some very, very special. We just had, for the holidays, we just had Gigi Young do an incredible episode dealing with the kind of psychic interface with AI going on, which is a fantastic episode. We'll have her back, of course, shortly. But, and of course, mind-blowing X-Series episodes. All of that is in there in the newsletter. Make sure you stand up and be counted. Miss Olivia, before we dive in.
Blazon River says, this is one of the few channels with consistent down-to-earth info. No flash, just facts. And Divine Element says, your gift is your integrity. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Well, I couldn't do it. This is the interesting thing. I could not do it any other way. I think
There'd
that
be no point in doing it
no,
any other way.
no, the work, all the stuff that's influenced me, can you imagine being influenced by like a Rudolf Steiner or somebody like that, and then coming out and doing something else, not aspiring to the same level of integrity would be crazy. And I'm always shocked by it. But, I've been in a lot of different circles around the media for years. And so these days I'm not so shocked. All right. So who is Willard Rockwell?
Yeah.
Who is he? Rockwell. Huh. Sort of forgotten chapter here. Well, Rockwell and North American Rockwell got us to the moon. They were, in fact, the #1 government contractor for the Apollo program. They were involved in so much of our history, and it was all the brainchild of Willard Rockwell, who's one of these guys, grows up rather mysteriously, and somehow, like Howard Hughes, attracts to himself this gigantic business. And, in the case of Howard Hughes, he inherited it. I didn't find any big inheritances with this guy, which was also quite interesting. But one of the things I did find out about him was that he was very involved around early aerospace development for World War I. So the planes that we saw going out there for World War I, which were really being tested for the first time. What I noticed when I was going through the background on him, his son, their family, and the entire company was the strange presence of the fact that they were interfacing on one hand with aerospace, and on the other hand, Colonel Willard Rockwell, who he would become Colonel Rockwell, his close association with the Cayce Foundation, the ARE, and his hunt basically for Atlantis, taking his aerospace work directly into the hot zone. What got me when I was looking for this is it was a sliver, just a sliver, that gave us an angle that Rockwell was involved here. I had seen Rockwell activity in Bimini building up for all these resorts and everything else. And I noticed the name on a number of occasions when I was looking into their early aerospace history, the X designs and everything else related to the X series, like the X-15 and all the rest, which the X-15, of course, Rockwell worked on. And they were very close with interacting with the German paperclip scientists that came over here, rolling out the technology. And they were involved in a number of different businesses. So they weren't just aerospace. And as a matter of fact, they would go on to become the sole supplier of communications and radio for all of NASA and space missions. And Willard would, in fact, himself become with his inventions, would become the foundations for some of the earliest peer-to-peer computing. So this guy was in the heart of the whole thing, but somehow tapped in directly to Cayce and Bimini. And I thought to myself, here we go again. But it only came about. It was, like I said, it was like kind of hitting the lottery, because I was going back and forth with someone named Trig Adams. And Trig Adams was the son of Margaret Sanders, who became Margaret Adams through marriage. And he had been the guy who really had discovered, along with his mother's Mars program, the Bimini Wall. But part of that team was Jay Valentine. Jay Valentine, very interesting oceanographer from Yale. And they wanted to keep it secret. And Valentine was like, no, it's Cayce's prediction. We're going out with it. And Cayce had predicted, of course, that's the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce. We've covered so much on this show. But Cayce had predicted in 1968 or 69, the Bimini, Atlantean and Poseidian Temple would rise off of the coast of Bimini. And we would start to see it. So not the whole thing, but you'd start to get an outline of it. So when they found the Bimini Road, all these people, different people were involved. One of them was Trig Adams. And Adams had written a letter to the Cayce Foundation when I was going through different things. And I realized that the letter wasn't in any of the Cayce material. I wanted to get my hands on the letter. And I contacted the Cayce Foundation to get the letter because I wanted to see what he was doing with Hewlin Cayce. He had correspondence with Hewlin Cayce, who was Cayce's son. And I thought this should be very telling. I had spoken to Trig Adams about his mother's work and her relationship with Marvin Minsky, who was the founder of AI. This woman had also been close to Einstein. So she's a very interesting trajectory. And we're going to get into Margaret tonight on her own. But anyway, we had all these kind of great interactions, maybe around 2020. And he was going to come on the show and give us the real heartbeat of what they had discovered there off of Bimini and the things he had heard since as well. And he was living on a boat at the time, as he told me. And then we had a few conversations. Everything was hunky-dory. And then, whoosh, total silence. So Trig was gone. And I said, well, I want to go back and see some of these letters that Trig exchanged with Hewlin Cayce. And it's interesting because when you look at this one letter, it opens up all the doors. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of luck. For example, my discovery of Alexandra's Cousteau and her importance in relation to the hot zone also came about through luck. It was the Virginia Giuffre legal case against Prince Andrew, where there's this little thing about how they were doing this exploitation bit, and they wanted to, Epstein and Maxwell wanted to get blackmail material on Alexandra Cousteau. It just was this fragment that opened up all these doors. And finding out that Margaret Adams, was the best friend of the inventor of AI, Marvin Minsky, and that Jeffrey Epstein was trying to set up Giuffre to get blackmail on Minsky, got me thinking in all kinds of different and interesting circles. But I'm going to read the letter, and then we're going to dive ourselves into what Willard Scott and North American were doing in relation to going to the moon on one hand and searching for this secret Atlantean power crystal that Cayce had identified on the other. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
What do you got there?
SB Harkins says, my mom worked for North American and then Rockwell. I grew up in El Segundo. My mom's direct boss was a test pilot.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they were vast. And, Boeing absorbed a great deal of them. But Rockwell Aerospace, other pieces of it still exist. But the main thrust of them being North American and everything, really after the Challenger disaster, I think their plans, they were going to be SpaceX basically in the late 80s. And when they cleaned out, this is part of the, moving space into this secret category and developing black projects in relation to it, getting rid of that public version, just being like, hey, we have a probe out there checking out Mars or Uranus. That development was very interesting. A lot of people are questioning it. If you go back into the literature in the late 80s and early 90s, there's a lot of questioning and saying, oh, we have this other program already doing something. There's a very funny thing. If you go back, there's a movie called Slacker. And there's a conspiracy theorist talking away in it. And he talks all about how we've been on Mars since the 1950s. You see, it was in the air. I think that movie's like 91.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's a great clip.
I still remember it. That's the portrait that you see when you walk into the Association of Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. And that is the organization that houses over 14,000 readings of Edgar Cayce. By the way, there's some 10,000 odd readings that are unaccounted for lingering out there because they didn't organize them until 1919. But Cayce had given a series of readings about Bimini, and he had started to indicate to these businessmen that it was part of an ancient continent. And he went really deep with it. 1926, he's giving all these different readings about it, and they get readings for a while. Suddenly, the typical thing that they would do over at the Cayce Foundation is someone would give the reading, they'd get a copy, and the ARE would keep a copy for future reference and cross-referencing and things like that. So they came and they got their copy and they grabbed the other copy, this group, of this special reading, which was their 9th on Bimini. And that's a very interesting story about how his Bimini readings for them went off the record. But here's the letter, and I was able to get it directly from the foundation. It's not available in any public place. You can't get it from an archive or anything like that. But here we go. It's addressed to Hewlin Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment, and it's dated October 30th, 1969. It says, Dear Hugh Lynn, it has come to my attention that Colonel Rockwell, head of North American Rockwell Corporation, is a member of the ARE. I would go on to find out that he was a major donor to the ARE in the 1960s.
Wasn't he the major donor?
I don't know, but he was
up there.
He was up there. A subsidiary of that company, North American Rockwell, has recently been acquiring large areas of Bimini in the islands south for development, much like those suggested in the Edgar Cayce readings. I am led to believe that the readings provided the impetus for this action, although I doubt that at the corporate level this would be entirely known, if at all. I was hoping you might be able to give us any information on this. It is not supposed to be a secret. If it is not supposed to be a secret and you know of any. Also, if it would be possible to arrange introduction, it sure would be helpful. I feel sure that the colonel would be very interested in the work of Mars. That's the Marine Archaeological Research Society that Margaret Adams, his mom, who's the daughter of Colonel Sanders, had put together. The data has not come back yet from the last trip to Bimini a few weeks ago, where we used $35,000 worth of fancy electronic gear loaned to us by the manufacturer for a survey of Bimini. And so they had discovered the wall and they wanted to know how much further this was going to go. Apologize. And he mentions Edgar Evans in there. It was Edgar Cayce's son, the other son. So that's the letter. Now, the letter is fascinating for a lot of reasons. One, it opens the door on Colonel Rockwell. There's nothing in the literature that where you'll find the connected point of Rockwell with Cayce. He knew it because he was out there with his mother exploring around Bimini, trying to find the Poseidian Temple Cayce had identified. They found the Bimini Road. They thought, we'll find the whole thing. While they're doing it, they hear Colonel Rockwell, he's doing all these surveys around here. He's buying up all the land around Bimini, and he also is a big donor over there at the ARE. Now, there were a number of unusual finds in places that Cayce had mentioned. One of them was in Bimini, in the Iberian Peninsula, things of that nature, Spain, France, the Pyrenees, and places like that. Cayce had identified where the egress of the Atlanteans had gone and where you could find their materials. And everything from the Basque to the Canary Islands and all these different places he identified. But the major stronghold of Poseidia, which was the group of Emilius that had the technology and had tried to use it for a positive reason, they were right there in that zone of the hot zone. Now, one of the things, just on a personal note, that I had discovered when I was doing this work was when I talked to people and I was doing these episodes, they would contact me and they would say, I work in government, or I worked, for a company doing surveys of the ocean floor. And basically that zone was something we had to identify. We had a signed document saying if we saw something like the Temple of Isis down there, we couldn't report it. You can't go to the newspaper and talk about it. You couldn't go to media at the time and do it. So it's not like, you can take some pictures and show it up on Twitter or something. So they said that one guy told me that he would be court-martialed, was in the document. So it's completely off limits. And on a corporation sense, you could be, charged for it and sued and everything else if you revealed anything that you saw. So the area over and over again was that piece off the coast of Florida on one hand, off of the western tip of Cuba on the other, and then over here, the Bahamas and all that, and then the Yucatan Peninsula. That whole area, which through their comments and everything else, I designated as the hot zone. That hot zone area contains a number of different ruins, but it doesn't just contain the odd temple or something like that. The work of Paulina Zalitsky, which we displayed heavily on this program, showed her work right off the western tip of Cuba, showed what she described not as a temple or two, but as a metropolis. So spreading out, it's an entire city off of Cuba. Now, the story of Zalitsky, we've covered in a number of episodes, so I'll just encapsulate it here. She was somebody who came from the Soviet Union at the time in the 60s to Cuba to do this work, oceanography, and then she escaped and defected to Canada, and then later developed a company for oceanography with her husband. Gets a call from Fidel Castro in the late 90s and says, I think I have some Spanish galleons off the coast here. I wonder if you wouldn't mind going in there and doing some research on it. And she did. And she found these incredible structures, which we've displayed. And I put actually in the thumbnail of this video, but we have images of them here I'll show as we go along tonight. But Paulina, while she was in the middle of that work, revealed it very quickly, and it went all over the place. This is really an underwater city. And she said the submersibles they were using showed hieroglyphs off of the buildings, and that they looked like large pyramid structures, and that the hieroglyphs were Mayan. Now, that was off the western tip of Cuba, and it's very interesting because this is a place where Thomas Townsend Brown spent so much time. And when I talked to his daughter about what he was doing there, she said that for years they didn't know that he was going there because he went there for a month every year with physicist Robert Sarbarker, who worked closely with the UFO file. And one of the things that he pointed out to his family was, I'm going to San Antonio. Well, this San Antonio was in western Cuba. It was not the Texas one. And of course, once the revolution happened, they couldn't do that anymore. But one of the things that is fascinating about that is I believe that T.T. Brown was there for the same reason. And in fact, when he had arrived, he had been sent there by a secret Navy team as far back as 1930, when he was a very young man. And the day that he got there was a massive earthquake. And he was put aboard this yacht called the Caroline. And of course, the captain of the yacht comes out with this weird glass tube, and inside is the original copy of the Alice in Wonderland book. And he looked at it and said, what is this book? Like, what's going on here? You know, why is it in that tube? And the captain said, well, if this boat goes down, the original copy is saved. So they considered it this kind of sacred relic, basically. But that was a billionaire that he met on that yacht. And it's a very strange web of stories in relation to what T.T. Brown was doing there. But he was doing it on the western tip of Cuba. Now, the archaeologists, a number of people commented on this story when it came out. There are a lot of books about Atlantis in Cuba and the ruins off Cuba. And that was around 2002. The original discovery was 2001. But she had been working with Castro since 1999. So I wonder about what they were seeing early on. What happens is she gets forced out. And I asked her, because I talked with her, we had a series of conversations, and I tried to get her to come on this program, but she still had a kind of residual trauma from the things that she had been through there, and I don't blame her a bit. But on very false pretenses, they forced her out of looking at those ruins off Cuba and then put her in a Mexican jail or, under suspicion of whatnot, some nonsense, just to spook her out and be like, don't come back, lady. And she went back to Canada and really never dealt with it again. Archaeology and a lot of people around this field dropped the ball with the Polina Zalitsky story. I've said it over and over again. I think archaeology in general was instructed not to talk about it because that's where the battle for the HotZone ruins was taking place. Now, if you go back a little bit into the work of Egerton Sykes, who was literally the top Atlantis researcher, and he was a former British intelligence guy, and he had given lectures at the Cayce Foundation. He thought the Cayce Foundation should be a lot bolder in their search for Atlantis. He said, look, there are all these sites across America that are Atlantean refugee, sites. I don't understand why you're not excavating and doing all this stuff. And they were very conservative about it all, very interestingly. Even the Cayce Foundation, which I think is excellent, but I think they were afraid of a lot of the things that came through Cayce about Atlantis, because he's talking about, spaceships. He's talking about ships that go through things, that dematerialize. He's talking about beings with superhuman faculties. And
Wait, who's talking about this?
Edgar Cayce.
Yes, got it.
As we know. In this southern part of Spain, where he said the Belial group had a stronghold versus the Amelius group over here in Poseidia by Bimini, they found this, actually. And
God, I love that sculpture.
They found it on a farm. It has no, it doesn't relate to any other ruins that they found there. It was originally discovered in 1897, the Lady of Iche. And it's a very fascinating piece, but it's so old that, it doesn't have correlation with other things that they found. However, they have discovered things under the water off of southern Spain. So we may have an opening there as well on that side of the Atlantean continent. But I think this gives us some indication of a totally different culture. This picture, of course, discovered by Clarence Bloomfield describe. This is in Florida. This shows the Two-Eye Stone power station that Casey was talking about. Again, it's a copper plate and does not relate to the other ruins around the area. So it's very unusual for a lot of reasons, but it works very closely with what Casey was giving us at the time. So we have some indication that there's something going on in that area and that some of these ruins are coming to pass. And so the next step that we need to take is to find out what's the difference between the traditional story of the archaeologists versus what people really know on the inside. That's where we're going next. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 211, and this is Rockwell and the HotZone, the secret Atlantis breakthrough. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half tonight. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
There's some questions about that sculpture. So Tim Houston wants to know, where was she found again? And Roger Z says, did they carbon date her?
Yeah, there were attempts to do this, and it's interesting because the first attempt is said 1800 BC, but then somebody who was looking at the research said, oh, there were all these assumptions is how they got there. And that object itself has been, kind of in the spotlight in a number of different ways. And so one group has held on to it. The Spanish government tried to hang on to it. The original family that owned the farm tried to hang on to it. So there's a lot of mystique about it, but it's very ancient in any case. My guess is a lot of these groups aren't set up to say something like, hey, this is 10,000 years old, And, but for me, it's a relic directly out of that Atlantean period. Yeah, what do you got?
Nanette Christ is in the ideas room tonight, and she says,
Excellent.
Did you uncover any info on Dr. Brown, who found the submerged pyramid of Andros and the crystal ball, who said North American Rockwell got all the underwater exploration rights?
Yes, isn't that fascinating? He was a chiropractor, Raymond Brown, and his story was he was diving with these different people. And what's interesting is when he told the story and talked about how there had been a hurricane that had moved things around previously, when people went back and checked that story, the details were meticulous, that they were absolutely correct for what he had described. Now, the story becomes fantastic because as he's diving, he sees a pyramid, he swims in. He sees like the capstone of a pyramid, there's an opening, and he's swimming around inside the structure, and he sees these hands holding something with a sword hanging down over it. And then he grabs the crystal ball, and there was all this very strange things about the crystal ball, the strange electromagnetic field that came off of it. And a lot of people tried to steal it. The whole story became bizarre because it was very difficult. But he had identified that Rockwell had owned the rights there. And this is very important because what we need to understand is that Rockwell came out. There's actually Rockwell Island down there. They created a gigantic resort. The Cat Key and all these other different places, they became the dominant force. And I believe they wanted a very good headquarters for their different discovery and mining and archaeological investigation of ancient Atlantis there. Now, you're not going to hear about this in general. This is the problem. As I said, some people will say, well, in Grok, I don't find anything about it. Look, you have to kind of, when you do this type of research, if you have enough of a foundation, when you get a breakthrough, you'll be able to open it up into another level. And so one of the ways that we were able to do it was through the Trigg Adams letter. So even though Trigg Adams didn't come on the program, because for whatever reason, he was concerned about his mother's association with Minsky, I was fascinated with that, not because I thought, Minsky was targeted by the Epstein people. He wasn't part of the Epstein group. And I think that somebody like Adams got spooked, maybe, which I can appreciate. However, in a real bottom line sense, what was going on there was Marvin Minsky was tight as anything with Margaret Adams. They were best friends. That's how they're described. That's how Minsky described Adams. So when you go back through the literature and you see in these different, See, around 1969, 1970, there's a book written about the expedition, and it was called Atlantis. I have it here. And what's interesting to me is, there's a couple of different ones. But that particular book is fascinating because it's a very unknown work, but it's all about Margaret Adams funding these two French investigators to get to the bottom of it. But what you see over and over again around this part of it is that she was highly secretive. She didn't want to come out with all of the discoveries and be like, we found ancient Atlantis. They wanted to study them in the background for a long, long time. And I'm going to read some quotes from Margaret Adams, the Margaret Sanders, the daughter of the Colonel. We did an entire episode called The Colonel in the Hot Zone, which is begging for part two because everyone has written me about that episode for years. We debuted it in 2022. But it is so fascinating because Margaret Adams, she was so fascinated by this that she used all of her resources to develop Mars, this exploration group, to find the lost city of Atlantis off of Bimini, as Cayce had described. So their group found the Bimini Wall. They were doing more investigations, but they wanted to keep them quiet. And this is why we need to read through the tea leaves a little bit as we go. Yes, what do you got?
Michael Skelton wants to know, what was Rockwell's military background again? Was he a colonel? And which branch? And was he distinguished in World War II or the Korean War?
Yeah, he not the Korean War, no, but he was both involved in World War I and World War II. I'm going to read his bio, actually. This is a shot of Rockwell, who became kind of like a,
wow,
dominant corporate guy. And he was a visionary. He was a very, they say, very down-to-earth person. He did not like the trappings of being a millionaire, or what would be a billionaire now. And what's interesting is his son, Willard Jr., who they call Al. I will say this about the son. The son seemed to me to try to be, trying to be part of that deep state. And I think there was
So the son was a sellout?
Well, in my opinion, yeah, there's something there with the son. And it's interesting because the father disagreed with him constantly. And there was this whole thing about like, you're older now, like you're getting shut down. And basically the son took over. And the son had a lot more tight associations with, let's say, deep state types than the father did. But the father is born here. Now, that's interesting. He's from Boston. Mm-hmm. And his father was a contractor. See, this is the part that didn't make sense to me. The father worked on automobiles and things in the 1880s, something. This is very early, but like, where's the big money coming from? It's not very well explained. Then he gets into MIT. Was it just on his genius? I don't know. It could be, but this part isn't so well explained in the basic bio, but let's go with it anyway. For 3 years at MIT, and then in 1909 and 1915, he was the chief engineer for several small companies. Then he moved to Cleveland, Ohio, becoming the manager of a company making axles for automobiles and trucks. During World War I, he was a civilian specialist in the Motor Transport Division of the Army Quartermaster Corps. In 1919, he sold his company to Oshkosh, in Oshkosh. And he sold it to Timken Detroit Axle Company in 1928, staying on as the manager. And then during World War II, it produced 80% of the axles for large Army trucks. So I guess through this development is where the wealth comes in, because suddenly he becomes the president of several smaller companies. By 1947, he has 5,000 employees, 15 plants, millions of dollars. Like he's just become this huge success. And Rockwell Standard Corporation moves along, and he became interested in aviation after the war and produced a wide variety of engine parts. Now, what's interesting to me is he wrote a book, which is, called The Colonel Speaks His Mind or something like that. And he is so against socialism, and he's so hardcore for the American way of life. And He harkens back to Jefferson. He's very, very, you know, on a government level, conservative-minded, limited government, and all the rest. So in the book, he actually criticizes the Kennedy administration quite often. And what is very strange and what I didn't expect to happen was that a Kennedy connection came into this story over the past, say, year and a half. And I've been developing information in the background. But somehow there's a huge Kennedy crisscross around here with Rockwell. And I'm going to show that tonight. And I'll tell you, it is a TKO on a level that we haven't seen in a while that might break the story wide open. He was a Baptist and a Republican, and we get some idea of this guy as this very conservative person. Somewhere along the line, he discovered the Cayce work. We don't know where, but by the time that letter was written, he's one of the major donors to the Cayce Foundation, and Trig Adams is asking about him. So somewhere along the line, he developed the interest.
Well, There Is a River was a national bestseller.
It was.
Right? What year was that?
Yeah, that's 1944.
Mm-hmm.
He could have discovered him there. Posthumously, he could have discovered him. Cayce dies in 1945. As a matter of fact, it's going to be now the 81st anniversary of Cayce's death tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Cayce, we lost Cayce some 80 some odd years ago. And it's interesting because his work, much like Steiner's work, seems to come into even more fruition in the 21st century than it did in the time period that it's in. They're almost looking at it like this is a comic book. This guy's talking about lasers and Atlantean airships and, you know, all the rest of it. I've got a very interesting quote from a reading tonight talking about how different sides of the universe were warlike. You know, well, let's try that out. Cayce's giving us the space story there, I guess.
Sorry. Where is this?
I'll read it. I'll
Okay.
read it. I promise you that. That's not one I'll leave out. But yeah, we're going to go deep with that tonight. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to remind you that we're going to take your questions in the second part of tonight's program. And Miss Olivia is taking those, putting those together now. And we'll go on here for about another 15 minutes. Then we'll go to your questions. How does that sound?
Fine.
Excellent. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 211. This is Rockwell in the Hot Zone, the secret Atlantis breakthrough. And we are going deep with it tonight. Rockwell is one I've been working on for a while. And like I said, was a lucky break. Like Alexandra Cousteau was a lucky break. Like Marvin Minsky was a lucky break. There's a lot of lucky breaks when you do this kind of work. And the letter, which is not anywhere in public circulation except at the Cayce Foundation, where you can request a copy and they will send it to you. You know, then that's kind of one of those fascinating little slivers that gives us the proof and the history of it. And Trig, if he would come out of retirement, as it were, and I can certainly see why he at the time didn't want to do it, although I was surprised, he's in a great position to do it right now. The timing couldn't be any better. I want to mention the newsletter also. Make sure that if you're new here, you go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our free newsletter to keep you and I in touch and around all the censorship that we're seeing on social media platforms. Takes 30 seconds to sign up, and you'll just get some info on the most amazing docuseries that we have coming up. Pyramid X, of course, we did a roundup at the end of the year. Fantastic, just incredible work. The Craze in the Hot Zone, JFK and the UFO File. It's all there, all new episodes of that coming out. And of course, mind-blowing X-Series episodes and interviews that you're not going to believe. So make sure you stand up and be counted. Go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for the newsletter. That'll keep us directly incommunicado. Yes, Miss Olivia.
So David Donaway, filling in some info here. Willard Rockwell Sr., the founder, was an MIT-educated engineer and inventor of an advanced truck axle design.
Yes,
Al,
right.
was brought into the business by his father and served as president and CEO. He was instrumental in leading the company's work on the NASA Apollo missions.
Yes.
And then S. Kent Rockwell, son of Willard Jr.,
he's a whole different.
Okay.
Yeah, save on that because yes, he's a whole different ball of wax on that. Yeah. But yeah, we have their traditional bios. What we're going to try to do is go a little bit deeper and underneath the surface there. One of the reasons I think it's interesting that Al was involved on the space side is I think the deep state part was moving them along. But it's also fascinating because are they getting access to this advanced technology through their archaeological investigations? That's a hallmark of the hot zone, as we know. We're going to go deeper on that here tonight. Now, there's a couple of readings where a few things stand out to me about the Atlantean ruins. So I'm going to go to them directly here, and then we're going to move further on down the line with Willard Rockwell and get comments from Margaret Adams herself about her Atlantean searches. The fried chicken never tasted so good.
Mm-hmm.
She called herself the spicy daughter. How about that? But I will say this. The colonel himself, very interestingly, he went to Cuba as an officer early on, 1906, 1907, and was stationed there for 2 years. Is this where Margaret Adams Sanders got her fascination with Atlantean ruins and the hot zone, etc.? He knew Cuba. He'd been there. Maybe he'd heard the stories. By the way, they also lived, and she grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, which was very close to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where Cayce was born and grew up. Is that where they heard about him in Kentucky? Is that the connection there? We found the connection of Ernest Hemingway and his mother with Edgar Cayce, that close family connection where Hugh Lynn was going to visit them for a month. And I've mentioned this. You know, when you go and see a friend, you might spend a weekend with them. You might spend a week, even a good friend. What level do you have to be on with somebody to spend a month with them? That's pretty close. So, you know, there's Cayce doing these readings, and then suddenly he's talking about Bimini, and boom, Hemingway is in the heart of Bimini, and he is going back and forth in these ships between Cuba and Bimini, and with such a kind of a focus around it. And he gets asked, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm looking for German U-boats. This is the story. But his boat wasn't equipped with anything but scientific equipment and fishing stuff. So it's not like he could blow a U-boat out of the water or anything. So what was the real story? This is the question. And of course, his brother, Lester, as we put on the record, founded New Atlantis, was obsessed with Atlantis, and gave a series of interviews toward the end of his life. He died the very same way, by suicide, with a rifle. And there's a lot of unusual pieces in there, but there's a 4-episode dedication to the Hemingway side of the Hot Zone part in that Hot Zone playlist. It's there on our channel here on YouTube, and it's free. Watch them. They are absolutely fascinating and change our understanding of the history. But that gives us, I think, some idea of what was happening there. Now, here is the Cayce reading that kind of explodes the topic. And this one's from 32. 26 is when he starts going into Bimini, but this is 6 years later. As has been said, much data has been received from time to time through psychic forces respecting conditions in or through this Atlantean period, or the age of this continent's existence. Now, in Cayce's work, the continent of Atlantis exists on one side, the Mediterranean, on the other side, the Gulf of Mexico, now called the Gulf of America. And so it's got all those things. And then when the Atlanteans are warring with each other, they set the Two Eye Stone power station too high, and it splits the island first into 3 islands and ultimately into 5 islands. So that's the kind of setup, but it's all taking place there. So you have on one side Bimini and this whole piece with the Poseidians, and then the other major islands are Arion and Og. And over there by Spain is where the Belial group had a stronghold, and the Emilius group, who were this kind of noble group. The other group had a real penchant for using the technology for devious conquering methods. And That group, it's very interesting. They had recruited a lot of the Law of One people. They're the best of their best. So this is where the wars were going on. And you could say the Belial group won the wars ultimately, but the whole continent went down because they had unleashed this insane apotheosis through the misuse of what Cayce called nightside forces. And the story only goes deeper than that. Okay, here's a little more. What took place during the period or periods when it was being broken up? What became of the inhabitants? Well, what was the character of their civilization? Are there any evidences of those or any portions of the inhabitants' escape? This is all Cayce asking the questions himself in trance. The position of the continent and the like must be of interest to people in the present day, if either by inference that individuals are being born in the earth plane to develop in the present, or are people being guided in their spiritual interpretations of individuals' lives' developments by the spirits of those who inhabited such a continent. In either case, if these are true, they are wielding and are to wield an influence upon the happenings in the present day world. What Cayce is getting at here is this whole soul group of Atlanteans who basically blew each other up are reincarnating in droves in the early 20th century, and they're setting up this great drama that we're witnessing here in the 21st century. The position of the continent of Atlantis occupied is that as between the Gulf of Mexico on the one hand and the Mediterranean upon the other. Evidences of this lost civilization are to be found in the Pyrenees, Morocco on the one hand, British Honduras, Yucatan, and America upon the other. There are some protruding portions within this that must have at one time or another been a portion of this great continent, the British West Indies or the Bahamas, and a portion of same that may be seen in the present. If the geological survey would be made in some of these, especially or notably Bimini and in the Gulf Stream through this vicinity, these may yet even be determined. What was the character of these people? And then he goes on to describe what they were. And here's that little thing I said about people from the universe coming in and making war. So we'll see what kind of interpretation this could be. But this is Cayce's reading, so I'm not putting words in his mouth, but listen to this. In the manner of living, in the manner of the moral, of the social, the religious life of these people, their classes existed much in the same order as existed among others, yet the like of the warlike influence did not exist in the Atlantean peoples as a people as it did in other portions of the universe. Now catch that, the universe. What do you think of that, Miss Olivia? Well, there's a lot of open-ended ways to interpret that, but I think he could be saying that something was going on where something warlike was coming in here, quite possibly. And then quickly about the Firestone. So the Two-Eye Stone is the power station, the portable version is the Firestone. And this supplies the energy for the entire culture to do anything that they want. And it's a massive station. The Two-Eye Stone itself it's a crystal that operates off of stars, and the stars beaming the energy in. Not only the sun, but the activity of stars.
I never caught that before. We've talked about the Two-Eye-Stone so many times.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it received starlight to charge it.
Yes. Very interesting. He talks about it being fueled by stars. About the Firestone was in the experience, did the activities of the entity make for those applications that dealt with both constructive and destructive portions of the period? It's very interesting. When people come into Cayce and they're talking about this, they're very excited. And they say, oh, I want to get there. I want to discover this. I want to rediscover it. And he's like, hold on just a minute. Like, remember what you did with it last time. You were involved in this disaster or that. So yeah, it's an incredibly sacred responsibility. It's an incredibly powerful thing. It can benefit humankind. But last time it led to destruction. So, go gently, Johnny, as it were. he says it would be well to give a description of this. In the center of a building that today would be said to have been lined with non-conductive metals, non-conducive stone, something akin to asbestos or bakelite or other non-conductors that are now being manufactured in England under a name that is known well to many that deal in such things. The building above the stone was oval, or a dome wherein there could be the rolling back. So the activity of the stone was received from the sun's rays or from the stars. The concentrating of the energies that emanate from bodies that are on fire themselves with the elements that are found and that are not found in the Earth's atmosphere. They're getting some kind of space energy here. And they may be on the road to rediscovering this now. The concentration through the prisms or glass, as would be called in the present, was in such a manner that it acted upon the instruments that were connected with the various modes of travel through induction methods. That made much the character of control, remote control through radio vibrations or directions. That would be in the present day, the manner of the force that was the impelling force from the stone acting upon the crafts themselves. So
this is plasma energy.
Well,
It sounds like it.
It's anti-gravity for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And there was the preparation so that when the dome rolled back, there might be little or no hindrance in the application direct to the various crafts that were to be impelled through space. Okay, there's an Atlantean space program for you. Whether in the radius of the visioning of the one eye, as may be called, or whether directed underwater or under other elements or through elements. Now, dematerialization, all sorts of things come into this. Casey talks about them flying through mountains. So we have a whole technological legacy back there that Casey is referring to. And these people are rediscovering the technology. We're going into space, we're developing satellites, and these companies are looking back here and drawing on this. And there's an entire group around the hot zone trying to tap in to that advanced energy. That's where we're going to go next. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 211, Rockwell in the Hot Zone, the secret Atlantis breakthrough. We're going to be taking your questions here very shortly. Before I go any further, what do you got?
I don't know if I have anything to follow that up.
That's good. That's good. Well, hold it. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
I'm
it's
just
good.
wondering if Ghislaine is coming up much tonight.
Well, just like the Hemingways, Ghislaine in the Hot Zone is a series that we have inside the Hot Zone. As a matter of fact, we did the 100th episode on Ghislaine in the Hot Zone. So all the things that you're hearing about now, where people are imitating so much of what we're doing on this, that episode is from 2021, and the first Ghislaine episode is from 2017. So we had already laid this stuff out in very, very concise ways. And the point of that was to say that Epstein and Maxwell were involved, and the key pivot point for all of it is that they're trying to get this blackmail information from Marvin Minsky. They're trying to get the blackmail information from Alexandra Cousteau. And I discovered that by reading through Virginia Giuffre's testimony against Prince Andrew. That was one breakthrough. But the other breakthrough is very, very interesting as well, which was, where did Marvin Minsky fit in? Well, if you went through Minsky's comments over time, and remember, they were trying to use Giuffre to take Minsky into some hotel over here in Cambridge and videotape him in all these compromising positions to blackmail him for something. Now, a lot of people have said, well, they're probably looking for AI blackmail and all the rest of it. I believe that the group, through a number of factors, like Ghislaine Maxwell, as we've talked about her Atlantis obsession and how she used the name Janet Atlantis. When we brought those things out, I don't think people knew what to do with them, frankly, because it's hard to connect the Atlantis piece. And why would these people be looking for Atlantis? But if you understand the Cayce story, if you understand that Marvin Minsky's best friend was Margaret Adams, then these things start to open up. But the real key, you can see them going after these different scientists, even somebody of Minsky's level, for their own purposes. But Alexandra Cousteau, her great claim to fame was an ocean nonprofit. But I have several episodes with Alexandra Cousteau because her grandfather was Jacques Cousteau. And Jacques Cousteau, his entire life was dedicated, spent the search for Atlantis, his documentaries, everything else. He was the one who knew everything there was to know about Atlantis. So when you think about these things and the research that we've done to put those things on the record, remember, they don't exist on the record. They don't, the points aren't interconnected. They're just hanging out there. This is what I want to point out about the kind of deep research and why you can't get a grok or something. Those things are fine aids or whatever, but you have to be able to interact with the information and open up a discovery. And that's what we were able to do with Ghislaine. It opens up more and more. And so we've done we've done actually 5 episodes with Ghislaine and then 1 Epstein in the HotZone. So that information is there in those 40 episodes. But I think the connecting links that we need to put together are these. Marvin Minsky, on one hand, is being blackmailed. The attempt is to be blackmailed by Epstein through Virginia Giuffre. It doesn't happen, by the way. He doesn't go for it. He knows something's up. But his best friend is Margaret Adams. She has all this Atlantis information she's sharing with Minsky. That's what they're looking for, in my opinion, with Minsky. And then with Cousteau's granddaughter, again, it's the Atlantis information. That's the key to opening up why Epstein is using the motifs and bringing in all the Atlantean imagery. So if we want to understand that and what that group was up to, we have to, on one level, look at the eugenicist, weird kind of shadow hanging over that and get past the Orgy Island thing and all the rest of it to really dig down and say, what is the heart of what these people, what is the activity?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up eugenics again, because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a word that is not used enough.
Absolutely.
People forget. It gets layered under everything and then forgotten. And it's
question.
right there in the heart of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the whole thrust of the Atlantis story is the pollution of the Belial group with making the things, making the automatons, and mixing the human, the scientific aspect of mixing the human tissue with the various minerals, with the various animals and things, and creating these automaton hybrids. So that whole idea of polluting the bloodline and all the rest of it comes directly out of this period. There's a couple of very interesting images that I want to show on this tip. And I'm going to bring the Kennedy part in here now if we still have time. Here's first a shot of Jack Hemingway with his daughters. And of course, Mariel Hemingway is in there. Jack Hemingway is a CIA agent, and his father was afraid of him when he was in Cuba. He didn't trust his own son here. And later, of course, Mariel would say that he had sexually abused his children. But Jack Hemingway is a very fascinating piece here because, again, I think that they're using Hemingway's son against him. And again, it's related directly to the information about Atlantis that is gathered in a vault there at Finca, the famous villa that Hemingway had. Now, what happens eventually is he has to flee Cuba and he leaves behind all that information. And it's the Kennedy White House with his widow that devises a plan to go in there, a national security incident, and grab all of the Epstein info, grab all the Atlantis info, rather, and bring it back, smuggle it back to the United States, risking an international incident. So there's a Kennedy document that comes out in 2015 that a lot of the Kennedy historians are just like, what is that about? No, we don't know anything about a national security incident that they were planning to do at Hemingway's villa. We didn't hear that. And apparently it's related to the facts. Now, if you go to the Kennedy Library, of course, you're going to find this gigantic swath of Hemingway material there. It is the largest repository of Hemingway's work. Now, I don't for a second think that they risked an international incident in order to get Ernest Hemingway's story ideas or poems or something. He was an incredible, legendary novelist, of course. But the vault that he was developing was all about this information relating to his own explorations about Atlantis. And that's where the close association of the Hemingways with Cayce's. You see how these things can start now to come together. We start to get the interface of how this works. Quick image update here. That is the city that Polina Zalitsky found off the western tip of Cuba. And it features heavily in our CRAZE in the HotZone documentary. We go into the images very deeply, of course. And that is Alexandra Cousteau. And she was targeted by Ghislaine. She had her own ocean nonprofit. And she's still around. She still does a lot. But, she won't talk about anything related to that case. But luckily, through the late Virginia Giuffre, who died really under strange circumstances, and was really bravely took on the royal family for this, she states directly in there that they had targeted Alexandra Cousteau. And we opened up the question, why? And then with the HotZone information, we answered it, yes.
Rotten Cryptobits has got black goo, too.
Okay, sure.
Well, on her hand.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Before I go any further, there's a weird story that came out. And we've really pointed out this whole idea about land rising and how it is a mystery school motif for the period of time that we're in. This is so crucial. So land is rising off the east coast of America that was formerly Atlantis. And that land rising accompanies a gigantic shift all across the globe where things are going down and things are going to be coming up. Now, it's my guess that a lot of these elite groups have tremendous access to this information. And, you hear this kind of vague thing floated out there about, a geophysical event or whatever it is. It's a pole shift. It's literally what is discussed in the Cayce work and others. We're talking about a pole shift, but it's gradual enough, as it were, not to be cataclysmic. Nonetheless, it brings tremendous changes and earth changes in its wake. And what we're seeing with the land rising is Cayce discusses how you're going to be watching this. And part of that land rising piece was the Poseidian Temple rising from the slime of ages off of the coast of Bimini. That's what we call the Bimini Wall now. But I always keep an eye out for these stories that support that, because what they're doing so often with the scientific literature is to get us into this idea that land, it's water that's rising, not land. And, the water's going to flood the coast. It's going to flood this. It's going to flood that. Yeah, but what else is going on? Other land is rising. Now, people in the know, coming from entertainment, politics, and all these other places, kind of the Oprah types, shall we say, know about this land rising piece. And I found a piece back there in the past where John Lennon was trying to buy lots in the Atlantic Ocean, like Lester Hemingway, for where this land was going to rise, because when it rises in international waters, it's anybody's game. You can found a country, as it were. And in Hemingway, Lester Hemingway's case, he actually had flags and a constitution and everything else ready for it. And he wrote a letter to the Johnson administration saying, "We are New Atlantis." So this is a new story. Giant structure discovered deep beneath Bermuda is unlike anything else on Earth. Huh. A thick layer of more than 12 miles of rock may explain why Bermuda seems to float above the surrounding ocean. There's only a couple of details in here that I want to read to you that I think are interesting, because Cayce tells us that off the East Coast, there's something beneath that is going to become visible. And now they're letting out just a little bit of it because my guess is that it's going to become too obvious and we're all going to be able to see what is actually going on there. A thick layer of more than 12 miles of rock may explain why Bermuda seems to float above the surrounding ocean. A move aside, the newest North Atlantic mystery lies beneath the enigmatic islands. Scientists have discovered a strange 12.4 mile thick rock layer beneath the oceanic crust under Bermuda. The level of thickness has never been seen in any similar layer worldwide. Typically, you have the bottom of the oceanic crust and what would be expected to be a mantle. The discovery of the new giant structure suggests the last eruption may have injected mantle rock into the crust, where it froze in place, creating something like a raft that raises the ocean floor by about 1,640 feet. So the dramatic sort of earth permutations and rising and falling and inundations and all the rest of it, as Cayce is telling us, there's something there that was above water in very recent history, going back and going under in 10,000 BC. Bermuda has long had a reputation for mystery, largely because of the Bermuda Triangle, an area between Florida and Puerto Rico where a supposedly unusual number of ships and aircraft have gone missing. And it overlaps directly with the hot zone. And what I've suggested from the literature is that the Cayce work talks about the two-eye stone and how it pulled everything down and caused, it was unintentionally set too high and caused these inundations. And the suggestion there is that there's something lingering from that original apotheum style disaster, or from the Atlantean power grid, the two-eye stone, as it were. And in fact, it's interesting because along with that, there's a very unusual series of caves in Western Cuba, and they record a fascinating astronomical event that took place in 20,000 BC. So somebody was hanging out in those caves in 20,000 BC. And it's very interesting because just before her discovery of the western, off the western tip of Cuba, of this Atlantean metropolis under the water off Cuba, the scientist Polina Zalitsky went and did a whole pictorial in that cave with its strange astronomical imaging, as it were. So it was like the handwriting was on the wall for Polina that the next thing she was going to do was change history or break history, as it were. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Sarah Hansen said, Mayan hieroglyphs, was Zalitsky able to hazard any possible date for the underwater ruins? And where can one find a copy of the pictures Zalitsky brought forward of the city?
Well, the only pictures that were released, because most of the stuff she did for the Cuban government. So the pictures that we got released, which are like there are a half dozen of them that she put out. And I showed one of them here tonight. We showed them in the CRAZE and the HotZone and Pyramid X documentaries. So they're in there. She released those, and she, you know, she's under certain restrictions about what she saw there, what she put out. And she's able to describe it. She's able to show the submersible design of it, but she was not able to give us everything because the Cuban government swallowed it up. Very interestingly, for the record, I pointed this out that back around the time that Trump got assassinated, I put out an episode called Wise Guys in the Hot Zone, which has a very deep section on Polina Zalitsky. And Zalitsky, she did an interesting thing. After I talked with her, and I said, you know, I think you should come on the show and we can really reignite all your discoveries and get to the bottom of this, because, you know, National Geographic tried to blow this off, and there have been all these weird denials about it all, and yet they all reported at the time because they were faced with the evidence, all these underwater ruins. And she said, I'll think about it, but, you know, she said, I'm not sure. I don't think anything changed the situation. Basically, it was under such an ironclad embargo. Now, what she started to do in the last year or two is to write children's books. And one of them is very interesting indeed. It's Dog Days in Cuba by Polina Zalitsky, which I highly recommend because it's loaded with symbolic imagery. And she is telling us the story of what she found and the things that she observed there in the middle of her discovery of these discoveries of Cuba through a children's story through a dog's eyes. And one of the very crucial aspects in her book is about the Pope coming to Cuba in 1998, which he did. And the idea was that they wanted to measure Castro at the time, who was still alive. He wanted to say to the Vatican, I know it's in your Vatican library about Atlantis. We have this discovery off the coast. Can we put these two things together? Her walking through this is a very, very interesting maze, as it were. We have an episode coming up for you. It'll be ready in about 3 or 4 weeks.
It's steganography, right?
It is, exactly. Mm-hmm. She had to do it this way. And there's a hint that there's another book like this that's coming out, again, through the eyes of this dog. And it is loaded with very, very, if you can read it in the proper way, it is loaded with facts, the way that she decided to get them out about her discoveries of this advanced ancient technology ruins there in Cuba. So it's extraordinary. The episode that we have is called Wise Guys in the Hot Zone. It's in the Hot Zone playlist, and I highly recommend it. At the time, that episode got kind of covered over by the Trump assassination episodes that we did, which were getting so many views. But the Wise Guys in the Hot Zone is crucial. And of course, it includes Frank Sinatra down there too. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew. Okay. Deep into the heart of Atlantis tonight. Cayce, Zalitsky, Epstein, and Maxwell. You know how it goes. Marvin Minsky, Margaret Adams, the Colonel. The gang's all here. We're going to be taking your questions here shortly. I'm running over, but probably worth it. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Jen Passvan says, I have to wonder if there's a connection to Sirius. And she hinted at that through the time.
Yeah. Interesting. That's interesting. I'll tell you what I find very striking. The Pope information was the most obvious, I think. And I do a big analysis in the Hot Zone, Wise Guys in the Hot Zone episode. But I will say this also. There's a thing there about a brain interface equipment that they're using, because something about the ruins basically are frying people's brainwaves. And it's very unusual because there's the whole Havana syndrome piece. So we're in the middle of connecting that up, and we're putting that episode out. And if you hear cheap imitations in the meantime, don't pay attention, because they're just making notes at this point.
Michael is wondering if one day SAR satellite technology like Filippo Biondi Cochrane Research Project will be used over specific areas of the Hot Zone, researching deep undersea.
Whoa. There's no question that one of the things that was happening, and I'm going to bring President Kennedy in here. There's a really strange thing with President Kennedy in relation to this. So President Kennedy's man at NASA, his astronaut, is Gordon Cooper. And he has a number of secret missions for him to just sit in his craft there and hang out over the Hot Zone. Now, all these things came out about what Gordon Cooper was doing out there, his extraordinary memory, how he could remember coordinates. He didn't have to write anything down, etc. And later, they were trying to say, he's looking for Spanish galleons. And there's this whole treasure hunting show where this guy who shared an office space with him in Florida, was saying, he was my dad's best friend and I got all this information from him. They made a TV series out of it, and they called it Cooper's Treasures, and it was all about this guy questing after the Spanish galleons. So what I found out in my own investigations is that Spanish galleons is a cover term for deep archaeological ruins, which is why when Castro said, hey, to Polina Zalitsky, I want you to look specifically for Spanish galleons. It's an easy way out. You don't tell somebody, I'm looking for Atlantean ruins. By the way, they're at the heart of a geopolitical battle. Venezuela, China, the United States, Russia, all these people want these ruins. Now, I don't say that lightly because I studied the work of Edgar Cayce, who was the top Atlantis expert and gave his entire library to the ARE and everything else. He said that they were well aware of major ruins in the Bahamas that resemble Egyptian ruins, and that this harkened back to the Atlantean story. Now, what's interesting is he himself said that he was aware of a temple of Isis in the Bahamas, but he would not give the location. And the reason for that was, well, this is more of this intrigue. So, according to him, there are several major countries and intelligence agencies involved in holding this secret, which is why the HotZone has become such a flashpoint for so many of these things. And I would say that the HotZone, if we can understand it, can crack all of the geopolitical issues which continue and roll on. Look, we have a Venezuela issue now. It's overwhelming. The president talks about invading in Venezuela. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. And yet, here we are. For some reason, whenever we get in this vicinity, and Venezuela is a stretch, but they apparently are deeply involved in the HotZone. They've been involved since Egerton Sykes' day in looking for this information. Yeah, what do you got?
On that note, Humanara says, DJ, have you heard anything about the mythical city of El Dorado actually being located somewhere underneath the island of Trinidad and Tobago, which is right off the coast of Venezuela?
Yes, that's very interesting. There's a number of different stories about it, but there's this hint, there's this ghost in our background that there's a city and that we can see it. Remember, High Brazil is a city that exists on all these maps and then disappears. But it's like a reappearing thing. There are even maps from the 1600s that have High Brazil on it in the Atlantic. So this ghost of a continent that shows up and disappears is quite fascinating to me because there's the famous Autek story where this guy, and he's come out, he was totally legit. He worked at Autek. And he said while he was there, this is the 1990s now, he gave the testimony in like 2010. He said that on his radar screen, a landmass appeared. So it wasn't a craft. It wasn't something else. It was identifiable. It was a gigantic landmass. And it was out there for a while. So the landmass just showed up, ready-made. It was on the radars. It freaked everyone out there at Autek. And Autek is the other piece that we didn't even really get into tonight. It was sitting there off Andros Island, underwater Area 51. This is where the magic happens, right? What are they doing? They're mining for the same 2I information that Rockwell had gone back to. And how much of that information helped our understanding of the space program? These are the questions that take us into this deep territory. And the other question is, why are these groups always around the Cayce Foundation? Why is Marvin Minsky, Margaret Adams, all these people that are hooked up with this advanced technology wing somehow default back into the Atlantis research of Edgar Cayce? There's a connection there. There's an understanding. These are the archaeological wars. That's the angle to explore, and it explains so much of the geopolitical tensions, including the fact that we almost blew up the world over Cuba. Not a lot of places can say that. Very few flashpoints like that. And yeah, there's the traditional story about what we understand about it. Castro and the standoff with Kennedy and the Russians putting the missiles in there, and Kennedy very carefully making sure that we didn't set off World War III using real statecraft. That's all true. However, something very strange about the entire piece of this little tiny island setting off World War III. There's something to do with that area of the world. That's where the HotZone information really serves us. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Okay, the Kennedy part, I'll bring in here. I'll read it. It's the Kennedy NASA piece with North American Rockwell, and then we'll go to your questions.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. And also, I want to mention to everyone that this is the 40th episode of the Hot Zone work inside of the X series, and so it's 200 episode 211 of the X series, but we have 300 episodes there in that X series playlist because there are about another some odd 90 episodes that are just supplementary information or interviews relating to it. So you're going to find that all in the X series playlist right here. There's a shot of Kennedy, and again, giving those instructions to Gordon Cooper, go up there and do these secret missions for me. Look down into the hot zone and tell me what you see. There's a weird thing that we've brought out in relation to President Kennedy, and it has to do with Antarctica. And Antarctica shows up over and over again around the Kennedy assassination as aerospace does. It's not very well explained. The person who owned the Texas School Book Depository, Dryhold Byrd, is the cousin of Admiral Byrd. And Byrd's, D.H. Byrd and the Admiral Byrd's cousin there. Then there's also Harry Byrd. And Harry controls the purse strings at NASA, close with LBJ and all the rest of it. So there's a big bird wing there that's very, very unusual. And we've gone deep in our episode, JFK, The Final Speech. That is a documentary that details all of the anomalies relating to Antarctica as an exotic weapons, exotic technology playground, as it were. Through the work of Eric Hecker, who was at Antarctica for a good while and observed some very unusual things there in relation to the neutrino, ice cube neutrino technology, we're getting a hint that the work at Antarctica is related directly to the UFO file. And in my work with John Warner, the fourth, when he was talking about his dad, telling him, he's operating this whole Operation Deep Freeze, working with all these scientists. And he's saying, Dad, can't you tell me what you're doing down there? And his dad is a member of Majestic, after all, controlling the UFO file. And he says, all I can tell you is it's related to space. So the Antarctica space piece is crucial for us to understand here. So if you go back to that story, you're going to find Admiral Byrd. He's there, and he goes with Lloyd Berkner, who is the same person, again, that Kennedy's going to meet at the Trade Mart. He's the physicist who headed up the Robertson panel, and he was in charge of the UFO file for the Robertson panel. Berkner is there in the beginning, in those early 1929 days, setting up radio with Admiral Byrd in Antarctica. And he's sending these signals out, and there's a guy who is in Dayton, Ohio, and he's only a teenager, and he's receiving these signals. That guy's name is Arthur Collins. And Arthur Collins becomes very important to the John F. Kennedy assassination story. And of course, becomes, kind of the major radio supplier for the United States, and all of its military, all of its NASA missions relies on Collins radio. And there's a deep history of this kind of deep state overlay with Collins. But again, he goes back to the origin story of our friends there in Antarctica. Now, I want to say this. Here's where this is all going to bring around, and we are all going to be face to face with an incredible anomaly about this story, which is that Collins Radio merged with Rockwell, North American Rockwell Aviation Aerospace, and they became Rockwell Collins. So there's a gigantic crisscross combination here that I'm going to try to open up here, and then we'll go to your question. A couple of things about our friend. First of all, he was born in Oklahoma during the Great Depression. And he actually he was a graduate of Rockford College in Illinois. And I'm sorry, he didn't grow up during the Depression. He basically just went to college during that era. And he was intensely interested in radio, became a licensed amateur radio operator at age 14, designed and built his own equipment. Arthur Collins is one of these kind of radio geniuses like Lloyd Berkner was. Collins became friends with and fellow amateur radio hams, including John Reinartz, who shared a special interest in radio wave propagation. And they do all these experiments and all these wonderful things happen, and this technology opens up. Arthur Collins graduated from high school in Cedar Rapids and attended Amherst College in Massachusetts. Over and over again, it comes back to Massachusetts and Boston. And he got a job at the U.S. Navy using longer wavelengths, and he gained national recognition. He graduated, and he became also, as I mentioned, the first person to receive those signals coming from Antarctica. Now, he does all this expansion, and he moves his factories and Collins Radio into Dallas, and he moves it into California. He's really becoming a dominant force with all this. Very interesting footnote with this story, which is years later, Walter Cronkite wanted to give him the credit for being such a radio pioneer and really setting all this up, and he refused to take any interviews. So his role went that deep, as it were. And then at the end of his life, he goes on to do private research and development, and he co-authors A Time for Innovation, and he's involved with the beginning of the internet all the way back there. So he entered into a patent for space communications, which is a very interesting area, and it's an area that John Trump was involved in. But Collins Radio, very early 1951, designed and built these very interesting high-gain antennas. And they sent the first messages off into the moon and then back. And the message was interesting. It was, "What hath God wrought?" which I thought was quite fascinating. Beginning with the X-15 experimental rocket plane, Collins Radio supplied radio communications equipment for the Apollo spacecraft. And of course, they eventually merge, and they provide all the radio communications for space everywhere that NASA is doing. So again, you have a very interesting footprint of aerospace close by to the Kennedy assassination. I'm going to tell you why it has anything at all to do with the Kennedy assassination. It's actually quite unusual. So deep state researchers who study the Kennedy assassination, they know all about the House Assassination Committee. And there's a very strange story there about an executive for Collins Radio named Mather being identified right where basically they grab Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, I'm going to read you a couple of things about this, and I'm going to show how Collins gets merged into North American Rockwell, and then we'll take your questions. How's that? All right. Most significant in the Texas license plate, PP4537, which was jotted down on a piece of paper by an elderly Oak Cliff mechanic, T.F. White, who noticed a man acting suspiciously behind the wheel of a 1958 two-tone Plymouth sedan. There's a book called Into the Nightmare by a famous director, and it's all about the killing of J.D. Tippit. It's very interesting, and that's where all this is drawn from. Now, the car was parked behind a billboard in the parking lot of a Mexican restaurant with the driver, like White, watching a flurry of Dallas police cars racing down the street with sirens blaring. That were called to the nearby scene of the shooting of Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit. White walked across the street to get closer and exchanged glance with a man who quickly drove away. White wrote down the license tag, PP4537, on a piece of paper and forgot about it until that day when he saw Lee Harvey Oswald on television and recognized him as the man in the car that he saw acting suspiciously. All right, we're going to find that Collins actually met Lee Harvey Oswald, and George DeMorcia was trying to set Lee Harvey Oswald up at a job at Collins Radio. Now, a few weeks later, when Dallas radio reporter and later mayor of Dallas, Wes Wise, gave a talk at the Oak Cliff restaurant, the owner of the garage where Mr. White worked mentioned the suspicious Plymouth to Wise, who then met White, who reluctantly told his story. Do you have the piece of paper with the license number on it? Wise asked. And sure enough, White had it right there in his pocket, PP4537. Now, it's interesting. This guy who was asking for this eventually becomes the mayor of Dallas, but he wasn't at that time. Wise later said he had to use all of his persuasions to convince White to hand over the paper with the number on it, that it was the patriotic and right thing to do, and promised White that he wouldn't get into trouble. White said nobody knew who or what was really behind the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, Arthur Collins, it's very interesting. If you study his life, has a lot of deep state tie connections. The picture that I found, I think was fascinating, is of him, in this kind of interesting conversation with Curtis LeMay shortly after the assassination of President Kennedy. And I think that just goes to show the tight communications he had at the very highest levels of military connections. Now, this got declassified from the House Assassinations Committee, which happened in 78 and 79. We just got this one, which says, in connection with its investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of President Kennedy, and the Select Committee on Assassinations requests access to all files and index in reference to the following individuals: Carl Mather, date of birth 10/22/27, they give his social security number and his present address. The reason they ask for it is because the license plate connects directly to Carl Mather, who's an executive at Collins Radio. So the car that this Oswald double is sitting at, where this mechanic writes down the license plate, is this Carl Mather guy. Now, it turns out, as they go a little bit along the way here, that he knows J.D. Tippett, and that he and J.D. Tippett's wife and his own wife, the couples get together and they hang out and their kids play and all the rest of it. They're a tight little family unit. This guy, Mather, who's an executive for Collins, it's his car that this mechanic sees Oswald acting nervously in, or the Oswald double, as it were. That's a shot of our friend Collins earlier in life, becoming a real radio genius. There's a number of things we can get into here with Collins, but here's what I want to stress. Collins is directly connected through this strange piece, or the Collins executive is, with Mather. And direct control over radio in that period was also very crucial for the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. So you would need to position people like that if you were going to stage this assassination and take over. You couldn't let the wrong stories get out, and radio was a fantastic way to control that. It's very interesting that Collins becomes the sole provider for NASA for all radio communications, and then North America merges with them. So when they're doing all of the Apollo development, they're integrating all of the Collins piece right into it. Mather himself, his only explanation is, I wasn't there. But he won't allow himself to be interrogated by the House Assassinations Committee. So it hangs out there in history that there's a very plausible witness that saw somebody acting like a very fidgety Oswald very close to the scene, sitting in Carl Mather's car. And of course, they grab this other, the real Oswald that we know, out of the movie theater. So who was this guy? It's very, very strange and very, very fascinating. But you see, the crisscross when you get at a geopolitical level and you start to realize that people from Rockwell, on one hand, are dealing with major aerospace deep state connections, which I believe are directly involved in the assassination of President Kennedy 62 years ago. Then the space program can be completely under the dominance of this exotic technology wing. They can hide in the secrecy with the advanced technology. They can take over the entire exotic technology program. Kennedy had big ambitions about space and how it was going to be a public program, how there'd be no weapons in space, et cetera. But when you find Collins directly together with Rockwell and then them merging, then you have a real hint that all of these things are interrelated. And then when we go further with Willard Rockwell and his Cayce fascination with the technology, we're looking at groups looking for advanced technology in the present or ancient advanced technology. And the handwriting is on the wall for it. I have more here, but we've run way over. So you're up, Miss Olivia.
Okay,
it's all
let's
you.
Start here. David Tormita. DJ, another Collins connection. Winfield Salisbury not only worked with Ernest and Dale Corson on the cyclotron, he did the moon bounce with Collins and Donald Menzel. He went to work for Vero Industries in Texas, that Vero edition of Morris Jessup, The Case for the UFO Vero edition.
Right. Well, that is fascinating. Obviously, the Collins piece is explosive because he's got the Antarctica piece right at the beginning. He's already exchanging signals with Byrd in 1928 as a young radio whiz. He's basically recruited into the deep state to handle, all of these radio communications. And it would have to be done by a real insider because you'd have military communications and everything else. But when you get around Mather and then you get into the connections directly around the incident and the witnesses and people observing him in the heart of what would be, the murder case of the century, then this whole thing explodes off the charts. When we include the fact that Rockwell merges in, then, these things really, really start to open up. But Vero is crucial because here's a crisscross that you're mentioning. But here's the other piece of how that works. The Vero edition is the very thing that we know gets Morris Jessup assassinated through carbon monoxide in his car. The person he is going to meet, as we know, was J. Manson Valentine, his best friend in Florida. Instead, he drives himself to a park, carbon monoxide through the window. That's it. So what's fascinating for me, if we do the math on that, is the reason for that is this Vero edition, which talks all about anti-gravity and has all of the very unusual annotations that are so advanced. And here we have right in the middle of all of it, Jessup talking about the UFO file. So, but Jessup is connected with J. Manson Valentine, and J. Manson Valentine is part of Mars. And they explode on the scene in 1968 because they find Cayce's Bimini Wall, the Atlantean ruins, off of Bimini. It's extraordinary. You could not map out connections like that. I remember when I found out that Jessup was Valentine's best friend. It was absolutely fascinating. And, if you go into Valentine further, you're going to find he did all of these expeditions and things in Florida and actually claimed to find pyramids in Florida that were just too hard to excavate and therefore were never identified as locations. And then also at a certain point, Yale told him to shut up, which I don't doubt for a moment. And I have an unusual news report from the Maryland newspaper in 1971 talking about how the Atlantis investigation got shut down over Bimini. And in my opinion, it didn't get shut down. It just became secret through Margaret Adams, which is where Minsky comes in. Yes.
Okay, let's go 2I. Teach peace, make peace. DJ, I went to Palomar Observatory in Southern California.
Oh, wow.
Speaking of domes, movable exposure to the sky. That place was singing, thrumming with the energetic resonance. I could feel it through touch. And Scott Koshland says the neutrino field contains enormous amounts of information and energy. The neutrino field interacts with plasma, which is the intermediary state between the etheric field and the material world.
Oh, yeah. That is absolutely fascinating. Well, Palomar would blow anyone's mind. We have an episode called The Sun King, which is all about the Palomar Observatory. It's one of my favorite episodes.
That's a fun episode.
His story is beyond unique. I'm going to show this real quickly, and then we'll move on to your questions again. Willard Jr. there, Al, he becomes the Grand Master of something called Kappa Sigma. And it is this gigantic network of universities and groups and all the rest of it. This symbol for Kappa Sigma is this. And it's very interesting because it looks very occult, of course. It does. But their whole thing is, you have to believe in God and believe in the light.
Well, who is their God?
Yeah. I think
it's an upside down pentagram.
And you do have keys in the X formation here.
Well, even up above the skull and crossbones.
Yes.
Right? Form an X.
Yeah, and these swords are too. But the keys with the X are always the keys to, the X symbolism, the X apotheum thing unlocks the technology understanding from the past. I just thought, wow, that's.
What else do you know about that group?
Oh, they have 250,000 members, incredibly high profile people from technological wings. And, a lot of these groups, with Masonic groups and everything else, I understand that there are multi-levels. So you have thousands and thousands of people associated with these groups who don't have any idea about the deeper interlocking meaning of the group that they're a part of, but they're incredible combination.
Let's see that again.
Yeah.
Oh.
What is it?
Somebody said it's a goat.
Oh, yeah.
And I can kind of see where they're getting that.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, it's got the upside down pentagram thing going on. There's no question.
Here,
to me,
show
I thought that immediately, that it looked like the classic kind of reversed pentagram, which is the evil one, right? But yeah, there you have it. So our friend Al, the son, he's directly associated with it. He's one of their masters, in fact. And he seems like such a shy, retiring guy to be such a part of it. But remember, I can say this, that I think his deep state connections go much further than his dad's. And also, it was the dad who was interested in the Cayce work. I wonder what this guy did with it, frankly, because not to demonize him, but his associations were, let's say, dodgier, as it were. Yes, what do you got?
David Termian again. Salisbury was the first to create early radar invisibility, stealth, and microwave energy beams a la Tesla, both with Vero.
Oh, that is very interesting. Yes. Well, the microwave thing is interesting because it's microwave radio that John Trump comes out of, and it's the short microwave radio waves. And eventually what they say is that, he's trying to develop a cure for cancer with this. It could very well be, but my suspicion always was, no, he was on kind of a secret space project, which makes sense because they consulted him for Star Wars later. A couple of quick pictures of Rockwell's son here, Willard Jr. There he is kind of later in the 80s, living it up a little bit with his successes. And it really is, they're about to become like a SpaceX type company, and Challenger crashes, and that's the end of any interest or money. And the explosion with Challenger, again, is very highly, highly suspicious. Do I have anything else for that? Hang on one second here. Yeah. I wanted to mention this real quick, which is I did a piece in the last Pyramid X video about the documentary episode, and it was about Giza Gate. And the people involved in Giza Gate, it's basically Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner, and they became the biggest kind of pushback force against people like Robert Bivol, Graham Hancock, whatever, examining the Giza Plateau and redating it and all the rest of it. They got all the TV series, the books, the National Geographic, and everything else. And then Hawass got enrolled into the Mubarak government, and which was a corrupt government. Mubarak went to prison for bribes. Zahi was accused of taking bribes for things. There were a lot of sketchy things about, oh, hey, we've got Nefertiti's DNA. Here's a special on National Geographic. He took tons of money for this. They were like, it's Indiana Jones. And behind the scenes, he was a real SOB, as people like Graham Hancock told me. Although I guess they play nice now. But I think it is important because Lehner was a high school dropout who dated Hewlin Cayce's daughter. And Hewlin Cayce said, you're so interested in this stuff. We need a guy to go to Egypt to be our man in Egypt, and we'll fund you through the Cairo University and everything else. And they did. And they also funded Zahi Hawass, parts of his education. They wanted him to be their man over there. And they also funded all these expeditions. Publicly, the Cayce Foundation was trashed repeatedly by Hawass and by Lehner as being wrong, and it's a myth and all this, and Cayce is full of it. I want you to really lock this in mind. This is a book called The Egyptian Heritage. It's by Mark Lehner. He wrote it. And it has all the Edgar Cayce readings about the Sphinx, automatons, the Hall of Records, and everything. This guy knows it all. Okay. And the book was written before he was converted by Zahi into bashing Cayce. It's from 1974. Okay. A long, long time ago. And so I think that needs to be put on the record, that those same people accepted money from the Cayce Foundation. They were put out there, and their whole purpose seemed to be to block out anything about Cayce's discovery, even though the Cayce Foundation was funding their activities. So why they would do it after the fact, why Zahi still gets money from them, is a real good question. But for me, that's Giza Gate. And these people know all about the Hall of Records, probably wanted to find it for themselves, probably wanted to keep the public out. And so people like Hancock and Robert Schoch, who, by the way, dated the Sphinx to 10,500 BC based on the water weathering pattern, because you can only get that with rain. He's a geologist. He probably knows what he was talking about. And their explanation for Zahi and Lehner was, oh, well, you can't show me anything from 2,500 BC back to 10,000 BC. Where's the culture in between? Well, now we found Göbekli Tepe, which is 12,000 BC. Okay. People were there. They were making monoliths. They were making temple structures or whatever. So all that stuff is blown out, that false history. The people who were blocking it were very, very well versed in the Cayce material. They were writing books on it. And those are books that are completely supportive of the original, Cayce Atlantis Hall of Records story. So that's a real, let's not let that stand in the public, as it were. These people know all about it. They were funded by it. And you can't trash Cayce and take his money at the same time. Do one or the other, And so that's a real disgrace, I think, in the grand scheme of things. And looking at this, yes, Ms.
Richard
Libby.
M. Thoughts about a second and far more deteriorated Sphinx being found on the Giza Plateau?
Yeah, I mean, the Sphinx there were miniature versions of the Sphinx that were developed later. They didn't quite have the same craftsmanship or whatever, but it was the idea that perpetuated. In terms of another one on the plateau, that's interesting. I don't think there's anything conclusive about anything like that, but I'll tell you this. The whole reason we called the docuseries Pyramid X is because very often when people are talking about the Cayce records and they say, look, this whole thing is about a hall of records, and the reading talks all about the hall of records being the entrance to it, being beneath the Sphinx right paw. And the reading itself is quite interesting because it talks about how at a certain point during the day, the light falls between the paws. There's some imagery there that is letting us know it's a little bit deeper of a subject. But what is crucial is that Cayce says the Hall of Records is between the Sphinx and the river, and it's in a buried pyramid of its own. It's a pyramid. It's Pyramid X. So when we think about a Hall of Records, we might think about a structure, an underground bunker or something. It's a pyramid. So think about that. The Atlanteans have a pyramid hanging out there, and I'm sure with that LIDAR and everything else, they certainly have an idea about it. There's one little hope involved here that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, which is that Cayce talked about how the people who would approach it, and he actually identified some of them. They asked who they would be, and he mentioned one of them would be British, actually. But he said that you could not pass into the Hall of Records and just, kind of grab what was in there, that there are sentinels set, and that the people who did it would have to be purified to a point to receive what was in the Hall of Records. I find that fascinating, and I also find it very interesting when you look at the whole history of the readings around the Hall of Records and what Cayce was putting out there. This is very unusual. Cayce was telling us about something. There was nothing in the literature that was anything like this. And I think as the time draws close, we're going to find exactly that. But remember, he said that there were 3. One's in Egypt, one's in that temple off of Bimini, and one's in Yucatan. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Esoteric 369. DJ, any updates on Dr. Carmen Bolter's Opus documentary on Atlantis? I feel she was murdered because of it.
Oh, it's a very sad story. She went, she was a frequent guest in the program and very, very good.
She loved you.
She was a great friend, really. She told me so much about her years in Egypt. She basically gave me so many facts. And I'll tell you what's interesting about Carmen's terrible timing. She went over to Spain and she thought, it's a nicer place. It's better than Canada, for her at the time. And when she went over there, it wasn't COVID or anything like that, but she developed an illness and she was having an operation for it. And during the operation died unexpectedly. So I don't know, what was involved with it, but she had been working very, very closely for about 3 years on this special documentary all about her Atlantis finds. And it was going to be like the Netflix series she had, which was The Pyramid Code, which was a big hit, and way back there. She was going to release this. And she told me that it was basically done. And that there was a couple who were helping her with it, and that it was going to be released, and they're working on it. We were talking about dates where she was going to come on and debut information about it and where it was going to be available and everything else. And she died unexpectedly and quite sadly. And, we talked about the hot zone and what she could do in the hot zone. And she talked about how we could actually, it was a whole thing about a cruise through the hot zone. And she had very interesting information about Bimini, and but she had filmed everywhere from Indonesia to Egypt to Spain, and she filmed Graham for it. I know that. I remember her talking about that. So she got very far with it, and I did hear that it was her sister who was involved in taking her things, and making sure they got to the right people and everything else, and that she did. But I heard that it was going to come out also but it has not. So
And
yeah.
it's been, I mean, what's it been, 4 or 5?
Yes. Yeah, actually.
So it's just buried.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing. I would love for the people who were working on it or her family members to come out and say something about it. And it's her final opus, and she was a real genius around Egyptology. Incredible person. Yeah, and she was great, really great person as well. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 211, Rockwell in the Hot Zone. Willard Rockwell, senior and junior. Sort of a little dark and light dance going on there. We're going to take another round of your questions here. Hot Zone Secret Atlantis Breakthrough. And there was a strange thing there with Collins radio merging right up with North American Rockwell, running all of the moon missions and applying all of the tech for the Apollo missions. And then somehow there's a piece of the Collins group being involved around the Kennedy assassination. Very strange. And those pivot points, again, there's strange overlap. It has to do with exotic technology on one hand, the deep archaeology on the other, and then this strange deep state control on the top. And of course, when you get around the exotic technology, you're talking about the UFO file. So right in the heart of it. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try to condense this because David Donadway has done the work. Okay, so S. Kent Rockwell, all right, so CEO and chairman of Astrotech International,
Yes.
focusing on commercial use of space exploration, and later founded Rockwell Venture Capital, okay? Venture Capital,
Yes.
Mind Vision Systems, a developer 3D geospatial mapping technology for underground mines.
Yes.
Okay.
Kent.
We've got
Yep.
Industrial 3D Printing Company for aerospace and automotive and energy
Yes.
sectors, and ClearPath Robotics. So there's all this stuff about robotics and AI.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's interesting about Kent is that I don't know why I became fascinated by his comments, and I have a piece here. Maybe we'll go back to Rockwell for a moment. So, by the way, this is the Colonel again, in his prime. There's a weird thing where Colonel Willard Rockwell went over just before the Kennedy assassination to Russia. And the headline of the story was Khrushchev basically rants at U.S. millionaires. Well, one of those U.S. millionaires was our friend Rockwell. And I found that just a strange piece with all this. It is literally 16 days before the Kennedy assassination, and Rockwell is over there hashing it out with the Russians. And he was a very heavy anti-communist. So I think it was interesting they selected him to go over there. But it's another kind of strange chapter in all that. One of the things that Kent Rockwell was involved in was this getaway, almost like hunting resort in Pennsylvania. And it changed hands between the Rockwells and the Mellons. And when I went and turned that spotlight on the Rockwells and the Mellons, I found out that the Mellons had in fact employed the Rockwells in the 20s and 30s, Andrew Mellon and his son. And then the Mellons merged in with an early version of Rockwell and became their financial support. So the Mellons deeply involved with North American Rockwell Aerospace. This piece, I think, should all give us all a double take. This is part of that Rockwell piece in Bimini, which is Rockwell Island luxury home redevelopment. So they're spread out there since the 1960s, as we know from Trig Adams, and now they have really established this major, fantastic, piece over there in Bimini. question is, have they used those basically as a major headquarters to look at what's going on in the hot zone? In my opinion, there's a very deep connection there with why Rockwell is over there in Bimini at all and the Cayce readings. So that is, I think, very clear from his association. And it's a very deep pivot point in the hot zone aerospace connection. Earlier, I spoke of Marvin Minsky, who was Margaret Adams' best friend. And she was the daughter of Colonel Sanders, who headed up Mars and explored all the hardcore sites around Bimini looking for the underwater ruins of Atlantis. There is Epstein over at MIT here with Marvin Minsky. And Minsky was targeted by Epstein. According to the testimony of Virginia Giuffre, she was supposed to meet him at a hotel and tape it and all that, record the entire experience. It didn't happen for some reason or another. But now I'm going to read a quote from Margaret Adams Sanders, and we're going to see why they were targeting Minsky, the father of AI. And I mean, they targeted a lot of scientists. Indeed, but let's stay with their hot zone targeting here. Now, the book is The Colonel's Secret, but it's only about his spicy 11 herbs secret. It's not about the hot zone secret. However, if you look deeply with a dark journalism lens, you'll find all the hot zone information sitting on the surface. Here we go. Father showed up in Florida once when I was off on one of my expeditions, and he learned I was out doing this, and he said, "What does she think she's going to do with Atlantis?" Okay. Despite this, Father couldn't resist visiting me in Virginia Beach to see what I found so interesting there. He met Hewlin Cayce, Edgar's son, and learned a lot about Atlantis. Jean Dixon, the famous psychic, was there with Ruth Montgomery, the author of Gift of Prophecy. Now, Jean Dixon was doing all these psychic readings, 88 visits to President Nixon, and deeply, deeply involved with all of these characters, them using her as a psychic and as an astrologer. But there she is now. Here's the connection. Hewlin Cayce, Jean Dixon, Ruth Montgomery, who writes her biography and is a psychic herself, and Colonel Sanders, and Colonel Sanders' daughter, who's obsessed with Atlantis, apparently. Jean and Ruth charmed Father with their sincerity, and it turned into a mutual admiration society that night at their lecture and book signing. The Colonel was spotted and had many asking for his autograph. Jean Dixon confirmed Cayce's predictions about Atlantis. Still, Father could see no reason why his daughter had any business with the lost continent. Now it gets even more interesting. But he was having a fascinating time hanging out at ARE headquarters. My son, Trig, who's Trig Adams, the pilot I mentioned earlier, also visited Virginia Beach and met Egerton Sykes from Brighton, England. Now, Egerton is the top Atlantologist in the world at that point. He's a retired British intelligence agent who said, "Oh, throw all these ruins right there in the hot zone, and all these countries are fighting over them." So Trig met also Marguerite Barbuck, who was from England, and became interested in Atlantis. He felt honored that Sykes requested that he should shoulder responsibilities concerning the search for Atlantis. In 1959, previously, Trig had suddenly quit college during his freshman year at the University of Florida in Gainesville. He explained it to me, "Mom, I can't find anyone who's going to college for the pure joy of learning," and so on. So he goes into the Marine Corps and all the rest. Once in the Marine Corps, he passed a college equivalency test, officers training school, and all the rest of it. He becomes the pilot who actually discovers the Bimini Wall. even though eventually this is all goes to J. Manson Valentine. I had saved a place for Trigg as vice president of my Mars Corporation with a starting salary of $20,000 a year, which is a lot in 1968. After a few months, he came to me and said, "Thanks, Mom, but I wasn't cut out for making this kind of money, and I've got to do my own thing," basically. So Trigg got a job with Eastern Airlines. Now, so we have Trigg there helping out Mars for a little while and then going his own way. So basically what happens here is that she goes forward with a group, and they go and they inspect the ruins around Bimini. And the group writes a book about the entire expedition, and she takes psychics on board, archaeologists on board, and all the rest of it. So these two guys in that book write the whole thing. And Marine Archaeological Research Society of Mars is a nonprofit foundation that Trigg and I had established to search for Atlantis. So she said that I should expect a call from these two because they wanted to stop in Miami. These are the archaeologists. So there's a quick little section in here I'll read, and then we'll take your last round of questions. How does that sound? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're deep here with the Colonel's daughter, Margaret Adams Sanders. Okay. Mars was Trigg's brainchild, and with some financial support, I'd helped him get it off the ground. Unfortunately, Trigg was scheduled to fly on the day that we had set up for our expedition with the two archaeologists. We invited Trigg's friend, Dr. Manson Valentine, to join us in Bimini, along with a few others who were to fly over to meet us at Brown's Hotel. All those invited were sworn to secrecy and were not to leak a word to the press if we discovered anything of significance. Dr. Valentine violated this trust in a most unbecoming way. At that time, he was the editor of a museum magazine. So what happens is, I'll make it a long story short here. She basically invites J. Manson Valentine along, and he breaks the secrecy code. Now, thank God in a sense, because I don't think that keeping that kind of secrecy would be a smart idea. And I
It
think
would still be a secret today.
yeah, I know.
Face it, the way
Exactly.
everything
So if he
works.
wasn't a grandstander, we wouldn't even know, right?
Yes, we owe him a lot.
So it's interesting because I think that she felt, oh, we can discover all this, keep it a secret, and then maybe let it out to the public much later. Whatever it was that was going on there, very strange. So finally, she goes on to say that basically she has this experience where they find other structures over by Andros Island. Now, these have been rumored for a long time, and it's very interesting to me that Autek is sitting right there at Andros, basically hovering around these Atlantean ruins. But there it is again, confirmed directly in here. And I recommend the book. There's a long section about her piece, spending time with Einstein and all the rest of it. But the Atlantean part is unmistakable. And it's also in notes in the Cayce readings that Margaret Adams this, Margaret Adams that. And even though she's a millionaire at the time, she offers Egerton Sykes to be his secretary because she wants to learn all that he knows about the HotZone and Atlantis. And in fact, he takes her on and she learns all about it. And then he dies. She develops this relationship with Minsky. And who is she sharing all the Atlantis info with? This other super genius who made AI, who's being targeted for blackmail by our friend. See how this adds up? Now we're going places. Now it's starting to open up. Okay. Go for it.
Do you know Margaret Sanders Adams must have had a reading with Cayce? Did she? Or was Cayce already passed by
No.
then?
Well, this is an interesting thing because they were in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's quite possible they heard of Cayce there and the colonel got readings. We don't know because here's what they do is they hide the names behind numbers. Now, Sidney Kirkpatrick, who's a very fascinating researcher on the Cayce front and brought so much forward, died recently, unfortunately. Just a terrific guy brought forward so many things, and he was revealing who was who. In one of his fabulous books, he brings forward about 12 of these figures and who they actually were, hiding behind the numbers. Now, there was some tussle there with the association that wanted to put the genie back in the bottle and say, no, we don't want to reveal that this one was Marilyn Monroe, that reading was so-and-so, this is George Gershwin, that's Woodrow Wilson. They wanted to leave them all anonymous as numbers. But now there's been a lot of cracking in all that. So my suggestion to the Cayce Foundation is to just let it all out. The last reading that Cayce did was in 1944. And so I think it's okay to let them out.
So I'm just curious what her past life was that she was so
captivated
by Atlantis.
Oh, yeah.
Did she ever claim anything?
She talks all about it in articles and things about, what she says is that she wanted to discover it to prove Cayce because she felt that Cayce was very close to God. And she wanted to prove the Atlantis story because of her relationship with Edgar Cayce in the material, But about her getting a reading, no, I don't think so because, I think she would have said it. But she was absolutely close with the whole family. And, she was a major figure at the ARE. And like I said, it's interesting that the two big figures around the Cayce Foundation in the 1960s are Willard Rockwell and Margaret Adams. Obviously there's an Atlantis connection with Rockwell and his advanced technology and what she was doing.
And you're saying in some way they must have been part of the same soul group.
Well, there's some technology connection. And but the soul group thing is interesting. There's no question that Atlantean reincarnation wave, Cayce had said it. The Atlanteans are coming in and they're going to make big changes like they did last time. The question is, are they going to blow everything up again? That's the HotZone secret Atlantis breakthrough right there.
Okay, David Donaway. During the 1970s and 80s, Rockwell was one of the several defense firms alongside SRI International and SAIC that explored parapsychological phenomena for military applications.
Yeah, they there's a when you look at Rockwell, you're looking at basically about 12 different divisions. So there's a military dedicated division. And there's like an aerospace dedicated division. There's a medicine division. There's this radio division. So they move and have all these tentacles. What's interesting is how much of it got sucked up by Boeing when they ran into trouble, supposedly, or was that just the plan all along? And but there are still three major pieces of Rockwell that still exist to this day. But we have to take into account that he could have been, they could have been mining Rockwell's fascination with Cayce for psychic intel as well. Yes.
Okay, David Tormina. DJ Collins Radio employed quite a famous paperclip Nazi, one Anton Fletner, who developed early rocket planes and strange craft at Collins.
Yes. I've got a list of unusual personnel at Collins. That's a very interesting one. And the fact that they had this overlay with the paperclip scientists, I think gives us some idea of where they were coming from. The problem is, again, I'm sure any country would have absorbed these paperclip scientists for the knowledge that they had. But apparently the problem is that we have this martial philosophy being transmitted into, so they're hanging on to their Nazi belief system and then integrating themselves. This is where the real clash and strangeness comes from. And in the back of their heads, they're thinking we can just, sublimate this whole system. But I will say this, that...
well, it's infiltrate. And we're getting a good picture of what that really looks like in real time.
It is infiltration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Culture matters.
Well, how do you get all these people in Dallas at the time also, even to the point of our friend who's running Bell Aerospace, Walter Dornberger, who's doing the X-15, and Collins is giving them the radio equipment for the X-15, and Rockwell is working on it. How are all these people in Dallas, including Berkner? I think it's quite interesting. It's almost like there's an assemblage taking place, and it's going to go one way or another. But I find it interesting that Collins was in Dallas, Walter Dornberger was heading up Bell Aerospace, and that we have people like Berkner. It suddenly seems like they had all come in there recently too. Berkner had only been in Dallas for a year and a half. John Connolly had only been governor since 62. So he just got in. He was like a new governor. There's a lot of new people showing up there on the scene and just setting the stage for the assassination. And like I said, they're setting up something, and maybe what was being set up, there was some consciousness on Kennedy's side, and he's thinking there's something good that's being set up in Dallas, and they're setting up something else as a contrast to it. So I went into the records around how NASA was going to be here in Cambridge, right outside of Harvard Square. In fact, it was all set to do it. And it took eminent domain from the Johnson administration to take it wholesale and move it to Houston. And Houston's a beautiful place, but Kennedy's desire, since he was, really inspiring the space program, to have it here, to just shoot that down, grab it by eminent domain and move it over to where your friends are, shows, just the kind of chicanery that was taking place with the space program at the time was extraordinary. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 211, Rockwell in the Hot Zone, the secret Atlantis breakthrough. We're going to take a couple more of your questions, and Miss Olivia, you're up.
CC Sunglasses at Night. It's pretty interesting. That's where Columbus first discovered America, or was he led to Atlantis? And Neo Lemuria, is it possible the impetus of European global colonization was archaeological wars among the Belial faction that egressed in the region?
Yeah. I think there's a preservation of the technology through the mystery schools, the good group and the bad group. And the good group, I think, takes like a holy oath through the Amelius group that becomes the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and the Akhenaten mystery tradition. And all of those that hold the X in the imagery as something that they're passing along, so that by the time you get to the Christian era, the X has been used as that real mystery message in the background. And they use for the symbol, for Christ's symbol, they use the X. I know that the cross, of course, is the ultimate symbol, but the X steganography through the schools can be tracked. I think what's strange is when it shows back up in the 20th century hiding technology programs, then we start to understand, oh, well, the people who were doing that, like Vannevar Bush was the master mason over at MIT, he has the know-how. He knows the mystery school technique. Therefore, he is moving that secrecy technique. And they are readopting this kind of vow around the X, which is we're going to hold on to the technology and keep it secret. Now, I think that process got exploited along the line somewhere. Look, even the Theosophical Society with the John Worrell Keeley, 1890s planes that could go 500 miles an hour as flying discs, they decide, no, World War I is coming. These people will destroy each other with this. We're going underground. So it's very interesting. It's spoken of openly. If you read The Secret Doctrine, if you read Steiner's work talking about Keeley's stuff, they say if that stuff becomes widely available, the people in charge of the culture will use it to destroy their counterparts. So this is quite fascinating as a facet, a war inside the mystery schools. But does it go back to Belial and Amelius? Yes. As a matter of fact, I think they understood the essence of it, because in Cayce's work and in anthroposophy, we weren't so closely knit in matter during the period. So they are harmonizing directly with the stuff. And the Amelius group is using it to interface with the saintly realm, to bring down those messages from the spiritual realm. And they train priestesses to do this. But the Belial group is imitative. And even though they seem to lack creativity, and they are, their motto is kind of might makes right. So they don't have the same creativity. They're fascinated with how the Emilius group does things. And so they imitate it. They're very imitative, and they imitate what they're doing, and they start using the technology for domination. Remember, Cayce's talking about this Emilius group. He says they don't have any warlike tendencies like those others in the universe, So it's open-ended. We don't know exactly what he's talking about, but whoever they were, like the Belial group, seems to be their focal point. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Michael, could Antarctica have been the last retreat of the Belial group just before the final destruction of Poseidia by the Two-Eye Stone? That group knowing what would happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that there's so much shifting that takes place there. What we do know is that some of that Belial group, they take off, but it's the Law of One Emilius group that is making arrangements. They're seeing things with their initiates. Rata is meeting up with them. They're getting together, and they want to place the Hall of Records so humanity doesn't forget the great strides in Atlantis and the whole story of the spirit and everything. So they put it in the Sphinx. They put it in the Poseidian Temple. They put it in Yucatan. Now, how Belial moved on is very interesting, because if you read that Cayce story about all the groups that come in to Egypt from Atlantis, they're not all the good guys. As a matter of fact, the Atlanteans come in with so many automaton things, cyborgs, slaves, and they treat them like slaves, and then they start treating the native population like slaves. So there's very, very unusual dynamics if you read between the lines in that story, which is they had the advanced technology, but now they're coming in as a more advanced group, but they don't have the technology like they had it. Once they get into Egypt, the Two-Eye Stones have failed. They can't really fly their stuff. And yet there are references in some of the readings that some of these groups are flying around between Spain, the Pyrenees, and Egypt. They're flying back and forth. So I believe the mystery school groups are keeping that technology. And my favorite story is the Ezekiel one, which I tell very often. They're asking Cayce in this reading, hey, can you give us some description of what the Atlantean technology was like? And he says, well, it's like what Ezekiel described, but that was just much later date, Well, it's a lot later. You've got 10,500 BC versus, 1500 BC. So who's keeping the technology for 9,000 years in the middle? It opens the question. And also the Ezekiel technology, which sounds like, a lot of people say, oh, it's ancient aliens or whatever. I mean, it sounds like UFO technology, right? But it's an Atlantean craft, according to Cayce. So we're going into realms and territories where the questions are opening up and opening up. And, but I think that they're crucial questions for the period that we're in. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 211, Rockwell in the HotZone, the Secret Atlantis Breakthrough. You guys have asked tremendous questions tonight. We're going to do the last group of questions here. So like 3 more questions. And then I have a quote to read and we're done. This is an interesting artifact. Speaking of the kind of Masonic tendencies of Collins and Rockwell, but when they were tearing down this Collins radio building in Dallas, they found this brick that actually has the signature of Arthur Collins, 1942. And it was the corner, like basically the cornerstone brick. So he's signing the Major Collins building there with his title. I just thought that was a little nice, interesting kind of Egyptian touch, shall we say. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to group all these together.
Okay.
A hive mind. The Epstein-Maxwell saga is definitely more understandable in light of your research and others in the deep state realm. Thank you. Neil Lemuria. So did Maxwell find what she was looking for?
I think they found things, but it was ongoing, and when you have that, see, what we brought forward was that Ghislaine Maxwell had a submarine taking Stephen Hawking down to look at something. And that what he was looking at, the name of the submarine was Atlantis. So, she was calling herself Janet Atlantis when she was on the run. There's all of these things about Maxwell, her father, printing all the manuals about the seafloor there in the 50s and 60s. So the Atlantis overlay with their story is hardcore. What it means to those groups to reignite or re-engage with the Belial past is for them basically to become godlike. And you can see that this is part of what Epstein is up to. And you see, you might say on one hand, well, dark journalism, you look through an Atlantis lens, and this is what you see. I'll tell you this, what's fascinating to me. It's undeniable that they were targeting people who had extensive Atlantean knowledge and backgrounds. There's no reason for it. Why would you target Alexander Cousteau otherwise? So, Minsky, Cousteau, they had the deep knowledge that these people were up to. And this is what they were after. The only other thing I would say about it is that all of the things at Zorro Ranch and at Epstein Island, they have this Atlantean atlas imagery. It's all over the place. So, how do you explain it? You could say, well, it was kind of a motif or whatever. So she's Janet Atlantis. He's got all this, Atlantis imagery everywhere. And they're targeting people who have deep knowledge of Atlantean ruins. You can penetrate through that and see what's going on if you use the background of the information of why would they be looking there. That takes you to the Cayce readings, and it takes you to previous situations, because this is a legacy thing handed down. Look at the Hemingways are doing. The Hemingways were looking for it how many years? Both brothers? Using submarines back then. Matter of fact, one of the fascinating things I found out about Lester, if you go into his history, is he was a news reporter during World War II, and he's down there in the submarine. His job is to go in the early submarines in the hot zone and report on battles or whatever down there. Well, while he's cruising around down there, what does he see? The Temple of Isis from Atlantis? That's probably explains a great deal. Later, what they explain his obsession with Atlantis by saying he was flying over Cuba. As he flies over the western tip, he sees a gigantic metropolis of a city. Well, there's Zalitsky's city, but he saw that in 1955. And she said, Castro hired me to do this thing in 1999. Okay. So 45 years is pretty good continuity for seeing these ruins. The ruins are definitely there. There's no question about it. And if you read Sykes' work, everything opens up dramatically, because he's like, oh yeah, I was an intelligence agent. All those groups were fighting. China was in there trying to get their hands on it. And I'm sure the Germans were, there's a whole thing about the Germans doing an expedition to Central America before the war. I don't think that they were just curious about the Mayans somehow. Yes. What do you got, Miss Olivia?
Blue Lotus petals. Has DJ given any examples of someone who has been pursued by the Belial cult due to their past life in Atlantis? This is a really intriguing question.
Well, we raised the whole thing because it comes from a Steiner quote. Steiner said, they will in the future target these people who have a reincarnation memory in their mind from the period in Atlantis for different types of technological marvels. One of those is life extension, how to live longer. And it's weird, the thing that they've been selling so much with AI, because they can't really explain how you're going to get by just fine when these robots take your jobs, is they keep talking about, oh yeah, everyone's going to live for free. And you know what? Like, forget about lifespan. You're going to live as long as you want. Well, first of all, if everyone's going to have money, why are these people grubbing so hard for every dollar? Why is Elon trying to set himself up with a $1 trillion pay package? He's the first one out there saying, oh, it doesn't matter. And it's interesting because I found him recently promoting this thing saying, oh, it was a whole statement by Peter Thiel, who, as we know, has his little agents in the field here. They're dropping in, pretending to be documentary guys, but they're Peter Thiel investors. What are you going to do? They say it in their own bio. If you have eyes to read, that's what you'll see. A lot of these podcasts are Peter Thiel people. And so Elon's promoting this Peter Thiel thing, and I was reading it, and it's Thiel saying, oh, none of this stuff, the Somali fraud, would have happened had Palantir been in there, because the government would know every action of everybody. Look, Palantir is basically like beast technology, all right? And it's control of humanity. For you to try to paint it this way, and then to have Elon promoting you doing that, the situation is getting a little bit like, first of all, they're selling a false vision of artificial intelligence. And there's no question that they have advances that they haven't told us about. But the idea that they're going to share those civilization-wide, these people who, at that level, at the high-tech level and at the government level, don't seem to have very little regard for humanity. I mean, much less than, at any time in history, in my opinion. So I think that there's a definite lack there, and there's a coordinated propaganda around what AI is going to bring, et cetera. And the other thing is that they're wringing their hands about, like, oh, we don't know what AI will do. And also, look, they've had this stuff since the late 1960s. They know exactly what it will do. These things are planned out long, long, long in advance. And if anything, I think we should take a totally kind of cynical view, open-minded, cynical view about all the things that they're saying about AI, because there's a big, big problem between what you can claim for it and what it can actually do and what you will actually release to the public. And by the way, if money's not going to matter anymore, then why not just sign away, Peter Thiel and Musk can do a press conference tomorrow and just sign away all their cash. It's not going to matter anyway, because everyone's going to be living on UBI, living it up, babe. I don't buy it. I don't believe the hype, I think, is a good watchword when you get around the stuff. All right, everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 211, Rockwell in the Hot Zone, the secret Atlantis breakthrough. Had a fantastic time talking with you about this. There's more shoes to drop around the hot zone, I can tell you that, and it's going to go much, much deeper still.
Can I throw a little wild card in here?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted
Sure.
to swing back to Venezuela for a minute. So David Donaway says, offshore, Venezuela holds potential for strategic minerals, primarily petroleum, oil and gas, the nation's economic backbone, but also other seabed resources like manganese nodules containing zinc, gold, platinum, and chromium.
Oh, yeah.
And Natty22 Love says Venezuela is the backer of Cuba. In South America, maybe they're coming for them, and after that, Cuba.
Oh, well, it could very well be. Venezuela and Cuba are so close, and they have such a great relationship. I think that there's been a lot of strange things about Cuba, including Havana Syndrome, when relations were reestablished finally, which, were shut off after the revolution. Kennedy was planning to reignite communications. And then Obama did it, but he did it in this toss-off way at the end of his administration. And then the Trump administration gets in and, talks tough or whatever. I don't think that, I think the policies towards Cuba, need to be revisited dramatically. And I think there are openings there. So I think I would try to take it on a totally different track. But it's in a weird position. Somebody doesn't want us dealing with Cuba, and that's where Havana Syndrome comes from. And by the way, Havana syndrome has a great deal, in that targeted advanced technology. It has a great deal to offer as an example, because when we're looking at it and the people who are there, they went originally to the American embassy, and they had these kind of microwave concussions. Then they come back to the United States. And when they're back in the United States, the symptoms follow. It's not like it just happens there. Whatever it is continues on. And I think what they're using there relates directly to what we call, the exotic technology aspect. There are UFO interactions and cases where people suffer similar symptoms. So I think that there's an opening there to see what's going on. But Havana syndrome represents, this is, we talk about our ancestors using chemical weapons and all the rest of it. This is like their next level. And they have the ability to do it. And that's why some real accountability around things like the microwave technology. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to mention this. This was the book about the actual expedition with Margaret Adams. And it's just called Atlantis. It's Overlooked Autobiography of a Search. Robert Farrow, Michael Grumley. Very strange book, very strange account of what they found. A little quote in here. Acceptance of Cayce's Atlantis is acceptance of the idea that we have come this way before, not perhaps that we, as our own Atlantean ancestors, ever reached the moon and stars, but that we destroyed ourselves and our culture because of a misuse of solar or nuclear power. In the readings on file in Virginia Beach, Cayce explains that the last of its 3 cataclysms, which destroyed the culture of Atlantis, came about through an upsetting of the natural balance. This balance was thrown off either through nuclear blasting or some other manner of touching off subterranean explosions and earthquakes. The combination of natural disasters and human error and malice occurred in the readings the last time, 10,000 BC. It's interesting. That's 1970, that book. But I will say this, that Cayce had talked that the Atlanteans, whatever they could think to do, they could do. And so they could travel anywhere in the galaxy. It's extraordinary to think about. But also, again, let's go back to this idea that they weren't so encased in physical matter, so that they're still, their dominant body might be their etheric body. And so literally where their brain could imagine to go, they could go. And at a certain point, that process turns into, I'm going to go there physically in a ship, There's something about that. There's some early indication that maybe there was a space aspect to an advanced culture like Atlantis. Even when he throws in galaxy, universe, and talks about space in relation to them, I think, we need to be aware that this is what he may be talking about. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Sala says, DJ, you're talking about the technology of the movie Forbidden Planet.
Oh,
whoa. Years since I've seen that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's something about some of those sci-fi movies, they tell a great story, 50s, 60s, 70s. I don't know, Star Trek tells a tremendous story. 2001 tells us all we need to know about AI. In fact, there are these pieces with this, remember that the Terminator came out of James Cameron's fever dream, right? We're being fed things on an unconscious, subconscious level. Oh yeah. Well, Mormons put it together. And it's not really talked about that the whole Mormon thing, the background of it takes place in space, right? And they also have a very interesting kind of Atlantis voyage type story early on there. It's interesting to me that, they asked Cayce in a reading, the 13th tribe, that lost tribe of Israel, where did they go? And he said they went to America. They landed in Mexico. And they said, how did they get there? And he said, in boats. And at the time they thought they couldn't reach it in boats, but later they proved you could go back and forth. So So much of that history doesn't hold up. Of course, there was communication and contact, the idea of like the Phoenicians coming over, early Phoenicians here in America. There's a whole fascinating piece that Steiner gets into about how America was well known by European groups in 800 AD, 900 AD, long before Columbus comes over and announces it. And that they wanted to study the activity of the electronic doppelganger of humanity, and that they were worried about something about America in relation to this, that they had kind of learned this from the native culture. So they kept it under wraps for a good 600 years until they were damn good and ready to do it. Other people would say, well, they were gold mining and things like that. It's quite possible. But even the Templars seem to have made it over here long before the Columbus story. Yes, Miss Olivia, last question of the night.
Last question. David Donaway gets it.
Yes.
We all want to know, of course, what Daniel Liszt was doing in Atlantis. Was he doing Bowie before Bowie?
That's pretty good.
Do you have any Atlantean past lives?
I had I remember when I talked to the Transcender group, what they told me about it. One of the things I will say is that they said I was part soothsayer, part politician. I remember that. That was pretty interesting. But they had incredible things. They they had me interacting with some very interesting figures back there. And all I can tell you is that memory, I think, for all of us who start to tap into those past lives, something very magical about Atlantis. It's like there's a kind of like psychic freedom to the whole thing. And apparently the downfall of Atlantis is the misuse of the psychic ability. And we can't understand. See, the way that they're introducing everything now is you're going to do it all through technology, and you'll do this and you'll do that, but it'll be a chip in your brain or some stupid neural link that Elon Musk wants to sell for the deep state. That has nothing to do with psychic anything. And you are the technology. And I guess that's a real watchword for us in 2026. You are the technology. So the idea of outside technology, you can augment things with tools, absolutely. But this idea that in order to advance, on a human, emotional, psycho-spiritual level, you would need technology is ludicrous. You are the technology. You're electromagnetic to start with. The technology I want to see studied is the human technology, which is the silver cord, the pituitary gland, our own psychic powers, our own psychic abilities, our own gifts for seeing retrocognitively the things that Edgar Cayce could do in the past, in the future. These are the things that need to be studied. And the other, I think that what Steiner gives us is that the other is an harmonic path, which is not to say eschew to the technology, just not to let it become our master. I think that's a fair way to approach it.
Can I ask you to go into Defiance and the TV show The Prisoner?
Oh wow, I love The Prisoner. It's too bad they only made 20 some odd episodes out of it. But you have to know that at a certain point, the state is going to demand of you something that goes far beyond the red line. There has to be a red line in the sand for what the state can get from you. And for me, that line is your body, your body and your mind. So, this is going to be the creation of the Internet of Things. They're going to try to integrate you electromagnetically into all the stuff that they have because it's convenient for them to create a control system like that. So there is a tremendous clash because the will of humanity and the stage that we're in is all about personal freedom and personal will. And you can't have that if you just go back into a slave system with new high-tech tools. And so that has to be opposed, I would say, and I think we see indications of it. What I think that one of the things to watch for is false versions of genuine information. And this is the real tricky part in all of this, which is I think that we're looking at a period of time where they're going to give you what seems like you're getting to the truth or whatever, but they're turning it into a junk conspiracy circus. And we've seen a lot of it, and there's tremendous money and influence around it. And it's a way to divide people and also to pretend to them like, hey, you got away from mainstream media, and look, you've got this incredible independent thing, and they're fighting to show you that Bridget Macron has a penis or something. Stay away from the freak show and get to the core, because there's no time like the present to get to the really hardcore potent information and think about the potent things that it can do, the good things it can do for your development, for the people around you, for the society at large. And they're going to try to make it, entertainment. They're going to try to make money off of downgrading humanity. So you have to be very careful of that, because in 2025, it was all the rage. And, it has to be called out very, very clearly. And with that, Miss Olivia, I am going to ask for your super chats.
I will get them in a second. What is the one episode of The Prisoner that's the most incredible episode to watch?
Oh, it was all about them being unmutual.
I think it's called The Unmutual.
Yes,
okay.
incredible.
If
Patrick
anybody can
McGowan.
watch that one. All right.
He brought it home, incredibly so.
Okay. Alarmanine Bay, Tim Houston, Eurythmy is Fun, Thomas Ball, A Hive Mind, M. Brax, Zero Infinity Live, Real Norman Smith, Harry Zeri 13, Erica Swenson Elliott, Leo Roaring Ohm, Mike Brosnahan, Mermaid Moxie, John O. Red Star, and Tommy Van Gumpel. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate your help. We couldn't do what we do without you. To all our subscribers, thank you for keeping us in the fight, as it were. We will see you all next week. We have a very exciting set of shows for you for January to kick off 2026. And I'm so happy to be here doing the X series with you in 2026. And I think, if anything, the work that we're doing here is more pertinent than ever and more relevant. And I think that's obvious by just how much of it is coming to the fore. And it's great to have the Ideas Room with your incredible insight and questions with us here tonight. I'll do a couple of shout outs before we go as well. Oh, yeah. There's another book from back there called The Stones of Atlantis, which is Dr. David Zink. And I spoke to his widow. She passed away, unfortunately, but I did an episode with her about it. And Zink was doing that psychic archaeology and that kind of exploration and getting real answers. And he worked with Cousteau. They did a documentary together. But that was very important. I've been looking for newer expeditions or anything that's taking place in the near future around the HotZone and stuff, and I haven't found anything relevant to Atlantis. So if you guys know about it, you can contact me at admin@darkjournalist.com, and I would love to hear about it. Let's see who you got out there. All right. Thank you, DJ and Miss Olivia. Excellent show. That is Johnny Ricardo, sir. Calypso's Search for Atlantis. Yeah. Well, a lot of the best ones were done, it looks like, in the 70s and 80s. And then you have Graham's work, and I don't see any good focus going on in the current period around Bimini and such. Hang on just a second. Okay. Dark Journalist is my escape into reality where time never feels wasted. Thank you. Old Man Junkins. Well, I appreciate it. So it's great to have you here with us and studying these important things together. I was just locked up at Shawshank last year. Wow. That's incredible. IDF. Wow. Take care. Interesting. Lindy T, great show tonight. Thank you both for being here. Some choice words for the Colonel in there. Let's see. Works of wisdom. Indeed. There is no such thing as conspiracy theory about your developed skills. Interesting. Eternal and riveting. Thanks for another grand evening. Huh. I really appreciate that. It was a great time. Thanks, mods. Okay. This is a great program tonight. Thanks. Debbie McAdoo. Great to have you out there. Wow. Magnetic field. Hot. You are number 6. Exactly.
Oh, Deep State You're Fired wants to know, DJ, what is the executive order number you started out with?
Oh, yeah. I don't have it handy, but if it's the executive order dealing with space that was put out December 23rd, and it's the EO concerning space from the Trump administration. Calypso's Search for Atlantis. Amazing show tonight. Jen Passivant. Thank you very much, Jen. It's great to see you out there. Excellent. Atlantis will be flying back to Earth very soon. It's got the good humor going on tonight. Much love, you all. Thank you. Fantastic. Have a great night, X-Fam. Najat, great to see you out there. Jenny Bogart. Lenny Bogart. Hey, DJ and Olivia, I'm late, but I made it. There he is. Yes, great show. Ties lots of threads together. Fantastic. Who is number 0? I love it. Ooh, all roads lead to space. I think that's very true. Oh, I think this guy has it here. Executive order 14369. Yeah, it's in, if you look in the Dark Journalist newsletter, it's in my Alex Jones episode of my presentation that we did. Happy New Year's, DJ. Happy New Year. 2026 will be fantastic indeed. And once I'm out of problems, I want a lifetime membership. Jimmy, we want you here. It's great to have you here with us. Thanks, DJ and Olivia. Take care. Good vibes for 2026. And let's see. This one was very interesting and useful. I certainly hope so. I know it goes deep, and you can feel when we get really close around something. But whoa, what a great ideas from tonight. And Lindy T, Scarlet Fire, Tina Boric. Gigi Young starting a new course. Yeah, she mentioned it in our interview. This sounds interesting. I want everyone to check this out. And that is about deeper meditation. Wise words, DJ. Thank you, Cosmic Blue. Truth will out. Indeed. Waters View. What a fantastic group we had out there. Did I miss anybody? I'm sure I missed some, but it was great to have you all here with us. And we will see you all next week. And Olivia, congratulations. What a great job you did. It
was so fun being back. I missed everybody so much.
Happy New Year, and you did a great job. We will, Johnny Ricardo, he loves The Prisoner too. Yes, I watch The Prisoner anytime. Just incredible. Let's see. Well, it's so true to life. It was so ahead of its time. My goodness. And okay, this is my neck of the woods. Esoteric 369. Didn't Casey say that his son was the most formidable person in the latter Atlantis period? That's the so-called dreaded one reading, which is very interesting. It's Edgar Evans, who I can tell you, when I met him, he was very Atlantean guy. He was like 92 years old, and he looked, like he could bench press you in a heartbeat. Let's see. Zardos with Sean Connery. This was similar to Eyes Wide Shut. Whoa. That's a good movie recommendation. Fantastic. Everyone, thank you so much. We will see you all next week. And it says end broadcast after all. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Magical indeed. Gene Roddenberry. Good comments are all rolling in now. We will see you all next week. It says end broadcast, but it never really ends, right?
Never really ends.
Never really ends. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and there can be again. So we will see you all next week. Have a fantastic weekend and a happy 2026.
Yeah. God bless everybody.